This set of 4 podcast reviews on the Uncharted games was posted to the I Am Games channel not very long ago when I completed each of these games in a row. Did them pretty much back to back over the course of about a week. And I've collected them all into this one video to post here because if I were to play and review the Uncharted spin-off game, then I would probably do it here, and that will probably happen. I was kind of uncharted out after doing all of these, but that's why this will just be broken into, 4 sections. You can check down in the description for time codes of when each game starts. See you at the end. So Uncharted 1, I played this game for the first time, I think a little over a decade ago, and when I first played it, I was really into it. I beat it on every difficulty, got all the treasures. I loved this game, wrote a whole review of it on my old blog, where I called it like an unparalleled cinematic experience and stuff like that. And I have to say, going back to it, I do not think it holds up all that well. Now, obviously, some element of this is that my taste has changed. I'm not necessarily impressed or engrossed by the same types of games that I was 10 years ago, but it's also just the fact that so much of what was impressive about the game had to do with the technical achievement of it for the time that it came out. This game came out very early into the PS3's lifespan. It was a huge step up in graphical fidelity. The game was definitely trying to push how impressive its environments looked, how impressive its character models and animations looked. This was a game that was heavily advertising the fact that they had done like full motion acting for the cutscenes. They mocapped actors actually acting on a green screen set and put that into the game. They were emphasizing the story. And I'll say that the biggest strength of this game in my mind is its pacing. It's the fact that the story is well structured. It is fun to watch unfold, and the game is relatively short, so you kind of feel like you're really just acting out little bits and pieces of game in between an engaging, fun little adventure story. But I think, in all honesty, aside from the graphics, which were, while impressive for the time, obviously not impressive now, the game just doesn't do anything exceptionally well. In fact, I think it does a lot of things pretty mediocrely. For instance, people have always memed on the platforming in this game, the fact that it doesn't take any thought or skill. You pretty much just follow the guidelines that are on the walls. You are only ever jumping on an extremely linear path. You don't really need to, time your jumps or anything. I guess you could argue that on the little swinging sections you do, but you really have to the only way you ever fuck up is if you just happen to fuck up really bad. If you're not really paying attention because it's so easy, then you just press the wrong button, or if the game is just being an ass. And this is something that happens often because something about the way that they tracked Nathan Drake's movement, I think just because they tried to make him move realistically, he is therefore forced to always make like complete turns and to try to have his feet, perfectly on whatever ledge he's standing on, things like that. And the result of this is you lack perfect control over him. And sometimes the game doesn't quite figure out what it wants to do with the avatar after you press the button. And so you have these awkward moments where a jump you should have been able to make, you instead fall off a cliff, and then when you respawn, you just do the exact same thing you did the time before, but it works this time. This happens a lot throughout a single playthrough of this game. And it might not be that noticeable if you're not looking out for it because of the fact that the respawns never set you that far back, particularly in platforming segments. So it's not like you're going to really get stuck somewhere. Most likely, you'll have it happen once, and then you'll just respawn and immediately get it right the second time. But when you play through it without that sense of wonder that you might have from a first playthrough, and you know what's going to happen, and you know where you should be able to jump, and you make a leap and it fucks up. It's just infuriating. It immediately is just like, wow, that was not my fault. That is because of this awkward control. And moreover, the game makes no kind of sense with like what ledges you can touch, like where you can go. It always wants you to be on its prescribed path through the level, and deviation is almost immediately punished with death. There are no shortage of times where there seems to be a ledge you should be able to drop onto, but when you drop down, you just die. Drake is able to swim sometimes, but you can't fall into most water in the game. There was one particularly egregious moment when you arrive at the Nazi base towards the end of the game, and Drake jumps out a window, and you grab onto this yellow pipe. Now, you're supposed to switch from that pipe onto another one that's on the right of you that ascends. However, I hadn't noticed this at first, so I instead descended the pipe to the bottom and made what would have been like a 1-foot drop from the pipe to the ground and died instantly as though I had fallen from a great distance. And I thought, that just looks stupid. So all of this stuff, what it does is it breaks immersion. It both breaks the flow of the game when an awkward jump leads to me instantly dying, and it also takes me out of the experience when Drake is, unable to make these very simplistic little falls or jumps. And moreover, it's extremely inconsistent how Drake's jumping actually works, because the game is programmed in such a way as to, have specific reactions in different locations to your button presses. So, if you are, say, facing down a 10-foot gap that Drake is supposed to be able to jump for the narrative, then he can jump that 10-foot gap. But there are other times, if you just press the jump button when you're not at one of those moments, he just limply jumps like a foot in the air or a foot of distance and immediately falls to his death. So there are countless times where you feel like you should be able to make a jump, and then you do it and you just feebly fall down. And then sometimes, if it looks like there was a ledge you should have been able to grab, you're now asking yourself, was this my fault for jumping at the wrong place, or was this the game's fault because sometimes legitimately the jumps just don't work? So you might end up trying the same thing again before coming to a conclusion about it, or, trying to figure something else out. Moments like that they really just show how the basic control scheme of the game isn't all that strong. It feels like what they really wanted to have was this extremely crafted experience, and it just seems like they should have accounted for more ways that the player could behave. I mean, I had a couple of moments where the camera started to sweep around to do one of these epic cinematic shots. And because of the fact that when I walk into a new area in a video game, my instinct is not to rush directly forward into it. I usually would not just continue running forward down a path. I want to stop and look around to make sure that there's not any secrets or things hidden. And this is a game that has secrets. It has these little treasures that are usually just kind of right off the beaten path. Like if you take a sidestep for 1 second, you'll find it. So I'm emerging over this cliffside to where you have the big reveal of the sort of stronghold that you spend your first sort of shootout section of the game. And the camera starts to move, but because I was not running forward and instead had turned to the right to see if there was anything behind the edge of the cave that I had just emerged from, when the camera started moving, I was just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, have I fallen off the cliff? What is happening? And then eventually it finally reached the fully adjusted perspective, and I was like, oh, if I had continued forward, this would have looked epic, but I didn't instinctively do that because that's just not how I play video games. So moments like that just make it feel awkward. It's like something that should have been epic instead looks really goofy and ill-considered. So, all right, platforming's not the best, but the platforming doesn't really make up a huge portion of this game. It's really more used to break things up. In fact, I would say that everything in this game is just to have something to do along the course of this story. It's really not a game that's about any one gameplay style, but just about having different things that are moderately fun that, can mix up between them. It's like a grab bag of game design elements that's just designed to propel you through this narrative. So, how is the combat? This is probably the biggest element of the game, and they actually did try to make it at least somewhat challenging. There are shootouts where you will likely die a few times before you get it right. And if you play the game on the higher difficulties, you're going to spend most of your time in the shootouts. Now, the thing is that the enemy AI is simultaneously dog shit and incredible. Because on the one hand, they don't really move around in any kind of sensical way. They just kind of follow a set path that they are, the enemies are just programmed to do a certain thing with the expectation of what position that you will be in. But they also all immediately can see you at all times. The second you've alerted the enemies in the area, everyone is just shooting at you right away. So when you play this on the higher difficulties, the only way to win is to memorize the locations of every single enemy. You will play a shootout over and over again until you know where every enemy spawns in. And a lot of these shootouts are designed in such a way that you're meant to go through them forward, picking off enemies as you go. And then once you get to the other side of the room, enemies start spawning in behind you. And again, you don't really receive warning that enemies are going to spawn in behind you until they start shooting at you. So you just need to know that shit if you're playing on a difficulty mode where you can't take more than one hit. Thankfully, on the lower difficulties, this isn't so much of a problem. But I didn't really mind. I enjoyed sort of playing it as a puzzle-solving routine back when I played this when I was younger. Now, playing it today, I'm just a lot more attuned to the fact that the gunplay feels terrible. Most of the guns handle like ass, have no real impact. The shotguns are some of the worst shotguns I've ever used in a video game. It doesn't really feel like you're firing anything at all. There's some impact when the enemy gets hit, but if you just are firing regularly, it just feels limp and terrible. Most of the handguns suck. The only thing that's really satisfying is just when you blow an enemy away. If you have one of the stronger handguns that kills enemies in one hit, it is satisfying to see the enemies die so easily, but there's almost like a shock feeling to it where you're like, oh, I can't believe that this puny little handgun, in terms of how it feels, had such a big effect on the enemy. There's also the fact that you can only ever carry around one handgun and one larger gun, sort of similar to how Gears of War handled it, except that there's just no creativity with what you can do with the loadout. I mean, when it comes to the handgun, your best bet is to just have whichever one is the strongest. I guess you could say that it's an ammo thing, like you can trade off having, more ammo for more power, but you always want the more powerful one because the weaker guns take like 5 fucking hits to kill an enemy unless you get all headshots, and even then, sometimes the hit detection is just so bullshit. There was one time I shot a guy in the head 6 times before he died. I mean, that's a rare occurrence, but it's something you'll see happen. And it's weird because enemies will sometimes react to being shot in certain places. Like you can shoot an enemy in the leg and kind of slow them down for a second, but it's inconsistent. It doesn't always work, and enemies can take so many fucking bullets, and they don't even react because they initiate like a getting hit animation, but if they then start up their next animation right afterwards, they'll just start shooting you before their last one's even really over. It's really kind of confusing. You don't really have a good read on, the information being fed to you is so inconsistent, and it's so often like subtly glitchy that you end up feeling like you just gotta spam ammo, spray and pray on enemies and hope that they die. And the game gives you enough ammo that you can win most shootouts without much of a problem. But on the rare instances that you end up with, like, a little bit of ammo, you end up having to play these gunfights quite tactically, by which I mean, again, memorizing where the enemies are by doing it over and over again, not so much by using raw skill. It's not like the shootout is going to play out wildly differently each time you do it, because again, the enemies are moving on scripted paths. So, moreover, a lot of those paths are just based around assumptions of what you will do in the shootout. They kind of seem to expect you to always be moving from one piece of cover to the next, but that's not always necessary. It's sometimes very easy to just hang back at the first couple pieces of cover in the room and pick off all of the enemies. And then the only reason you move forward is that you need to get more ammo, and then suddenly a bunch of new enemies spawn in, who assumably were supposed to have spawned in like in the course of the fight. It can just be really awkward. It's like you see the mechanism of what's going on way too much. It's like you eventually memorize that, okay, when I step behind this this box, that's when the next wave will spawn in. It's like a little too computery. Again, immersion breaking. I don't even really hate the level design. I think that the shootout galleries are fine. I mean, it's just a bunch of chest-high walls. It's certainly not as well designed as other chest-high wall shooters are. You know, this is no Gears of War, but then Gears of War doesn't have you doing nearly the variety of things that this game does, or have nearly as, you know, well-written of characters, I guess. I mean, honestly, and we'll get to the narrative, I guess. The narrative of this game you know, the characters are cheeky, their dialogue is pretty hit or miss, there's not any like really funny standout lines, it's just kind of cheeky banter between a couple of characters. Sully is obviously likable just because he's a surly old guy, it's hard not to like him. Drake just is a very boilerplate protagonist, and Elena is just a very boilerplate girl character. You know, they all have ridiculous upper arm strength and get themselves out of any situation just by sheer luck. And like, what happens in most cutscenes is basically just moving characters around for the next set piece to happen. It's like you'll have a scene where Elena's like, oh, I can grab that ladder, boost me up onto your shoulders, and then she climbs up to another area, and then a bunch of enemies spawn in back where you are, and it's like, okay, so the purpose of this cutscene was just so that they can be separated, so this action scene can play out and make sense. And like, there's just a lot of cutscenes like that. It's always like, it's like, you know, what makes sense for this next level to play out, or, you know, to get the right combination of characters in the scenes at the right times. I guess the word I'm looking for is convenient, and that's fine on some level. It's an adventure story, but it's just that it's never surprising. And like, when I think of something like Indiana Jones and how, you know, this is clearly an homage to movies like that, Indiana Jones has moments where you are legitimately taken by surprise by something, that the setups aren't so well telegraphed. You know, when Drake like hands Sully the booklet that he got from Sir Francis Drake, like he hands it to him very dramatically, like, hold on to this, will you? And it's like, ooh, better take note that Sully's taking this book. What? Sully got shot in the chest, exactly where he has a pocket on his shirt? You know, then like, not to say that I even know if I necessarily got that my first time through. It's just like, it's so telegraphed with everything that happens, and like, when you play through it again, it's just not that rewatchable. It's not the kind of story that really holds up to multiple viewings, because it's pretty uncomplicated and not that interesting. The villains kind of suck. I mean, I think Eddie Raja is funny just because he has a goofy accent and he has the best line in the game. That's right, you ugly kunyuk, don't mess with Eddie Raja. But, you know, the British guy is just an insufferable ponce. I mean, I guess that's kind of part of the point, because then Navarro's like the secret villain at the end. That's kind of a nice reveal. I guess that's the one thing, like, it's obviously going to happen, but like, just the way that Navarro presents it is like, you people are all stupid, like, you don't understand the value of what this thing actually is. I actually know what's going on here. I thought that was kind of fun. But yeah, I think the characters are likable and somewhat magnetic, even though they are all fucking psychotic murderers. But like, at the very least, you have that. But I just don't think the story is ultimately all that memorable. I mean, it's just a basic adventure story. The characters don't have any arcs. There's no real like, there's they just kind of are chasing this statue through the whole game, and then at the end, they sink it into the ocean. Twist, there's zombies. Wow. No big deal. It's mostly just a gameplay shakeup. It's not even really that interesting in terms of the story, which I guess is why Uncharted 2 was so much more praised, for having a slightly more complex story, bigger set pieces, more memorable moments. And it's funny because when I played this game when I was younger, I legitimately liked Uncharted 1 more than Uncharted 2 because I wasn't as into the set pieces as I was into just the shooting game. And like, it's funny for me to go back to it and be like, wow, this sucks as a shooting game. I don't know why I was so into it as a kid, The collectibles suck. Getting the treasures, they're all like pretty lame and generic, and they're in just basic, like they're not hard to find. You pick up most of them just on the course of your way through the game. So I know it sounds like I'm basically just ragging on this game incessantly, and I don't want to do that because I don't think it's a bad game. I think that as a shooting game, if it was just a shooter, it would be a bad shooter game. But if it was just a platformer, it would be a bad platformer. If it was just a puzzle game, it would be a fucking terrible puzzle game because none of the puzzles require any thought whatsoever. They literally just give you the answers. All of this is just, again, to create a sense of variety and to never have you doing one thing for too long that you would notice that it's not that great. And, like, the environments are pretty interesting, I guess. They're not really that memorable. It's just kind of an island in a jungle. Most of the game is green or brown. It's not going to give you the memorable locales of like a Souls game or something. I guess I kind of remember the church because you go through it twice and there's a big shootout in there. But like, yeah, there's no like set piece moments that are particularly memorable. And then you have shit like the jet ski segment, which is just so badly thought out. I don't know how it even passed into the game. In the jet ski segment, you have to drive a jet ski through an area where enemies are shooting at you and there's explosive barrels. And you can shoot at the enemies and barrels, but you have to stop the jet ski to do it. So all you end up doing is jet skiing forward for like 2 seconds, then shooting some barrels and shooting some guys, then jet skiing for another 2 seconds. You never like pick up speed. It's never exciting because you're always having to stop and pop. It's controls like ass. I don't know how that thing got 3 segments in the game other than just to have something to break up, like a different stylistic shift in the middle, just like the turret section, which is, again, not exciting at all in retrospect. And I generally don't really care for turret sections anyways. So it's like, really, it's just the fact that the game is paced well that makes it like sort of pass through you in a very easy kind of way. It's not, you never feel like you're stuck on any one thing for long enough for it to be frustrating, but it's also just challenging enough to be kind of satisfying. So it's like, it's just an unobtrusive experience. It flows right through you. And you get to the end and you go, all right, well, I've taken a little adventure with these characters who are, because of the, pretty good acting in mocap, they come off as like somewhat realistic, I suppose. It's like, I don't know how to I don't know why I enjoy it at all. When I break it down, I feel like I'm describing a bad game, but like all of it's functional. It's just that it's not great. It's not that it's bad. It's just that there's nothing particularly standout about it other than that it is so easily playable. And like, again, returning to it, it's hard to be impressed by anything because the graphics have not aged that well. All that character animation doesn't look so good anymore. It's a little more uncanny valley than I remember it being from something that, when I played it for the first time, was blowing my fucking mind with how it looked. And I think that was a huge part of the appeal. And it's why, that continued to be part of the appeal for all the Uncharted games. Like, obviously, each one has raised the bar considerably in every aspect. So I don't think it's even weird to think that this game has aged poorly. Like, it's not that nothing I'm criticizing it for was brought up at the time. It's just that at the time, the strengths it had outweighed those for a lot of people. It was like, sure, maybe the gunplay is not that great, but we didn't have 700 other of these types of games to compare it to. And most importantly, we didn't have Tomb Raider, the reboot. Because when the Tomb Raider reboot came out, a lot of people criticized it for being a ripoff of Uncharted. And I'll say that while the Tomb Raider games have shitty cutscenes and awful characters and terrible acting, the mechanics feel way better. Lara Croft is way more fun to control. Her jumping is satisfying. The gunplay is not perfect, but it's definitely better than it is in this game, as are the level layouts, the fact that it's an interconnected open world that you can explore and find all kinds of secret dungeons and secret treasures, the fact that it's a lot longer and more in-depth. It's just, even though I don't even like the set pieces in that game at all, playing Tomb Raider and then trying to come back and play Uncharted just really, makes it show, I guess, what are the strengths and weaknesses of these two studios. Naughty Dog, better storytellers, even if I think a lot of the dialogue is groan-worthy and convenient. A lot of it is shit like Nathan Drake saying, Ronan and Navarro couldn't have gone far if they left their lackeys at the gate, and I'm like, why? What does that mean? You're just telling me what I need to know for the plot, even though there's no actual logic to what you're saying. Whatever. This is just fluff dialogue. It's not like it matters, but there's just a lot of that. It's just a lot of characters saying things so the plot can be interpreted and happen. But, again, it's a hell of a lot better than Tomb Raider's fucking boring-ass, long-ass cutscenes full of unlikable, trite characters, which are more indicative of the standard of these types of games. So I guess what I'm saying is that Uncharted reached a really high benchmark in a world that didn't have high standards. But the bar has been raised, and it no longer can really... just can't hold up next to that, and that's fine. There's 3 more Uncharted games. I aims to play through them all, so I could, I guess there's more than 3, but you know what I mean. I Am Games, signing out. Much to my pleasant surprise, Uncharted 2 has held up a lot better than Uncharted 1. It's kind of funny, I remember not having liked Uncharted 2 as much when I played it back 10 years ago. And I think the reason for that is that I was just really into cover shooters. I just really enjoyed playing through those levels over and over again, memorizing the enemy patterns, having those long, protracted shootouts. And I think I took Uncharted 1 as a game that I could play multiple times more easily because more of it was about those shooting galleries. It felt like the stuff in between really was just in between. It was like, this is more of a shooter game that just has a bunch of other stuff to kind of break up the monotony of the shootouts. And, I liked those other elements of it. But playing Uncharted 2, they clearly realized what was the strength of Uncharted, which is basically that it's a playable movie, but one that can be so much more insane than what a movie could get away with. That's the funny thing about it. A lot of people say, oh, why not just make a movie? Well, a movie can't have the incredibly long scripted set pieces that a video game can have that can be entertaining just because you are controlling it. And I think Uncharted 2 does a pretty good job of that. It's just a better movie that you're playing than the first game was. So my complaints about the first game, some of them were mitigated. Some of them are basically the same, but it's just less of a problem. The shootouts
Still have the issue of most of the guns feel like shit. Particularly the pistol is just egregious in this game. I mean, there's multiple pistols, but the one that you'll find yourself using the most, the sort of standard high ammo clip pistol, is just unbelievably dog shit. It's kind of hilarious how bad it is. And, you know, a lot of the guns just aren't that satisfying, but at least the shooting galleries are better designed. And it's not even so much just the level design, but the variety in the types of shootouts that you'll get into. There's a better variety of enemies, a better variety of scenarios. You know, it might be that you're doing a shootout while trying to run from a tank, or doing a shootout while, you know, the infrastructure is crumbling around you, or you're doing a shootout while you're trying to, I don't know, you know, in the first game there was this zombies that attacked, right, towards the end, and one of the cooler segments is when the zombies are fighting with your enemies, the soldiers that were hired by the bad guy. And so they're kind of fighting each other while you're fighting them. But it's a really short segment that doesn't really have that much tactical depth on your part. In the second game, this happens again, except that the enemies are much more intelligent. They're a more interesting opponent, and you actually have to make more strategic decisions about, you know, who you're going to kill in what order between the two different sets of bad guys who you're fighting against. So, yeah, just the level of variety in the way that these shootouts are planned out is much higher. And I can't even go into, you know, every single specific instance. Just suffice it to say that it felt like they were trying not to have, I won't say not any two shootouts feel exactly the same, but there's just, you know, a much bigger variety. And also, the first game had this problem of there is a stealth mechanic, but it's really boring. And usually you'll enter a shooting arena and you can pretty easily kill the first guy with stealth. But if you want to try to kill everybody, you're going to spend a lot of time just waiting around for people to move. And because of the way the arena, you know, shooting arenas are set up, almost always, at some point, you're going to get spotted, and enemies are going to start spawning in from all different sides. Uncharted 2 has more sections where stealth is more viable, at least for longer, where you might take out a few people before you start shooting, or even one small segment, I managed to actually kill everybody with stealth, and so it felt like that mechanic was better explored, and it's amazing that the game doesn't have any forced stealth sections, aside from at the very beginning. You know, which even that part is not so bad, because it's not that different from how the shootouts play out anyway. You just gotta, you know, kind of memorize the enemy locations, but it's in a more interesting place. But yeah, there's a lot of sections where, you know, it lends itself to stealth. You're expected to stealth, but it doesn't mean you have to or for long. So I thought that was handled better. The guns still don't feel that great, but shootouts are not as boring. And moreover, the game just isn't as focused on them. There's way more set pieces. There's way more variety. If the first game's biggest selling point was that it was paced well, this one is paced even better. You know, you've got even more shakeup, even more unique locations, and just cooler places that the game takes place. I mean, obviously the most memorable probably moment in the whole game is just that it opens with Drake bleeding out in a train car that's hanging off a cliff, and you have to climb up this train car. And even if it is just one of those platforming segments that doesn't require any thought or skill at all, at the very least, the imagery of it is highly memorable. And again, it's something that in a movie might seem like too much or go on for too long, but what's great about the scripted sequences in this game is that they just try to come up with every possible thing that could go wrong during that sequence. It's like every pipe that could break, every rock that could fall, you know, anything you walk on is going to crumble under you. You know, there's going to be a tank, and it's going to be charging through buildings. It's going to be going over cliff sides. It's like they really tried to think, what is everything we can have a player do during this set piece? And you know, there are some times I would even say that it goes almost too far, where like it becomes like white noise, just that so much insane shit is happening all the time. But it, you know, it slows you down. It gives you proper quiet moments to digest and get ready for the next thing, so that it has a pop. And then when you're in these like long climactic moments, you're like, holy fuck, I can't believe this is still going on. I can't believe that they found this many ways to fuck with you. Probably the best of these, of course, being the when you finally get back to the train midway through the game, because they set this thing up where, you start the game in that position, you're like, how did I end up here? Then about halfway through the game, you finally make it to a train station, you're like, oh shit, it's gonna be that part. Well, then you get on a moving train, and there is a like almost 20-minute section of you working your way up this train, climbing on the outside, going through the inside, fighting off every different type of enemy, going through tunnels, dodging, signs that are going overhead. The helicopter shows up, and now you got to fend off a helicopter with guys, and like it's just constantly shaking things up. And like sort of it seems like they thought of everything that could possibly happen to you on a train. So that moment ends up being extremely exciting, way fun to play through, and also just a miracle of programming, like the way that this thing plays out, because it never feels like you're just looping through assets, because the way they set it up is that, if you're on one train car, then it is just kind of putting you through repetitive environments while you're on that train car. But then as soon as you move to the next one, it'll activate the next stage of the environment, so to speak. So, every time you look outside, you're going to see something different, because it's always masking the transitions between those things extremely well. It just feels like a miracle when you're playing through it. It feels like you really have traveled this insane distance on this train, in a way that, it's hard to believe a video game could even do that. It feels like it would have taken this Herculean effort, and even if you think about the shortcuts, even if you think about how they really must have done it, it doesn't make it any less impressive. It might even make it more impressive just to think about how they managed to make this thing happen, and still have a game that is longer than the first one, is, just generally more impressive. So many unique environments, because the first game basically all takes place in either jungles or tombs. You're going between jungles and tombs and I guess a castle, but everything's kind of samey. You don't really get a different feel from the different locations. In Uncharted 2, you start off like doing a museum heist. You go through a jungle, but it's more of a marsh, so it looks different enough from the last one that it doesn't quite feel like you're just in another jungle. You eventually end up in a bombed out city, and you're exploring through that. I will say it's really funny how, in order to avoid the city just kind of looking all brown, they just have like all these random colored flags that are strung around just to add a spice of color to the scenery, It's like such a cheap and easy way to make things look a little bit more colorful, but nonetheless, the bombed out city, while it's sort of a video game cliche, it's certainly not the first time I've ever parkoured through a bombed out city. It makes for a really great set piece that you go so far around the city, and even though you're on like such a set and limited path, because you can see the whole city all the time, and you're always having these moments where Drake's like, all right, we got to get to that tower that's like a mile away, and then you will trek that mile. And sure, they only had to really create the series of hallways that leads you there that would be no more expansive than a normal game. The fact that it feels like you're actually traversing that city just makes it feel incredibly big. It makes it feel like, wow, there's so much going on here. And they also did a better job of accounting for what the player is going to do. They didn't put too many unreasonable stuff where it's like, okay, that ledge looks like one I should be able to grab, why can't I? Or why did I die here when it seems like I, have done this thing in other places? But there is still a problem with that. There is still a problem of, especially like what you can do in cutscenes versus what you can do in the game. It's like, this is one of those games where you'll get shot constantly throughout the whole game, but if you get shot in a cutscene, it's suddenly a huge deal. You're bleeding out, and like it's or you kill 50 fucking people in a row, but 2 guys with guns can detain you somehow. Fortunately, the game pushes things to such a ridiculously absurd extreme that you can at least say, like, okay, I'm not meant to take it that seriously. I think that's also helped by the fact that the game is cheeky and, it's sort of comedic in tone. The characters are kind of breaking the fourth wall every now and then, or just making fun of like the ridiculousness of the situation. Because like the first game already presents us with a hero who is capable of, who has just the most insane upper arm strength ever, who makes Ninja Warrior finalists look like fucking pansies because he can do anything with merely the grip strength of his first two knuckles. In this game, he can do all that while having been shot. And the game kind of makes fun of it by having other characters, like, not be able to do those things. Like, everybody kind of has Drake be their climbing boy, you know? Like, it's almost a meme in universe that he has this ridiculous grip strength. And it's also funny the way the game sort of... It appeals to your self-esteem, I guess, as a gamer by having all of the other guys be wimps. Like, for instance, the character Flynn, when you do your opening heist with him, he's always just being a whiny little bitch and he doesn't want to do anything. He makes you do all the climbing. He makes you do all the hard work. And so, you know, you as a gamer develop this hatred for him that, you know, will fuel you through the story to continue hating him as he becomes such a bastard. And it's like, you know, it's more effective than just having him be kind of a piece of shit in cutscenes. The fact that he's literally in the game making you do shit for him makes you hate him. And so it's, you know, it's just even more effective storytelling in that regard. That's something you can't get out of a movie, you know? I don't think Flynn would be a villain that you felt all that strongly about in a movie as opposed to in a game where he's, you know, bantering with you as you're trying to do shit for him. So, you know, I have to give credit to things like that. I think that not enough people give credence to the idea that, you know, just because a game is a lot of scripted sequences and is kind of a playable movie doesn't mean that it's not doing things unique to video games. And, you know, I think video games should explore every possibility of what they can possibly be. So I think it's fair to have a game that's like this. Do I wish the gunplay was better? Yes. I mean, I don't understand even how... Like, how is it that you can have a developer put so much fucking effort into a game and fuck up something so fundamental? Something that seems like it should be easy to do because other games have done it. You can just, you know, you just look at what works. Like, how do you not know how to animate gunshots to be satisfying or give the right amount of feedback when you pull a trigger? That baffles me. But nonetheless, I had fun playing this game. There were fewer frustrating platforming bits, and I will say there was an interesting trade-off that I wasn't sure how I felt about, because in the first game, it's really corny and laughable how obvious the track you have to climb on is. Like, you just see a bunch of convenient, you know, cuts in a wall that would have no purpose in real life. How did they get there other than to exist for you to climb on them? Which is pretty stupid. But in this game, they did a much better job of disguising that stuff, but maybe too good of a job, because some, like, the parts I got stuck on the most was just running around trying to figure out what the fuck I needed to climb. Like, just not noticing some little craggle on the wall, and running around for fucking 5 minutes trying to figure out what the hell I need to climb. You know, maybe that's just me, but, like, I felt like I was being pretty observant. I'm looking at all the walls, you know, that it's just, oh, fuck, it was right there. How the fuck did I miss that, you know? But I had a lot of those moments on this playthrough. The puzzles are better. There's more that actually require some degree of thought. There's more ways to fail doing the platforming segments. You know, so it felt like just more, it ironically felt like more of a game because it felt like I was less on rails. It was less easy mode, you know? And when I went back to play Uncharted 1, even though I have beaten that game on every difficulty 10 years ago, I had started the game on hard mode, and I ended up turning it down to normal mode just because of the fact that it's hard in ways that are just aggravating. Enemies always know exactly where you are. The second that the enemy in general knows that you are in the arena, all of them have an immediate bead on you, and the second you pop your head out, you're fucking dead. And even though the game does have regenerating health, you die pretty quickly if 5 different guys shoot at you at the same time, and it takes a while for the health to regenerate, and they tend to, you know, throw grenades at you and shit. So, like, I just found it frustrating more so than fun in the last game. In this game, I started on hard, and I had forgotten I was on hard until towards the end of the game. And, like, it was challenging. I died plenty of times in a lot of the shootouts, so it didn't feel like the game was piss easy or anything. There were some times where it was a little bit frustrating because enemies would literally spawn in and throw a grenade at the same time. So it's like you couldn't possibly have planned around when this grenade was going to be thrown. You couldn't have, like, observed an enemy doing it because they spawned in and did it immediately. Or times where they do the same with rocket launchers or sniper rifles. Just like there were times where I died simply because an enemy spawned and killed me before I could have reacted. And at the very end of the game, when the blue guys show up, there's one battle where 3 of them attack you, and the idea is you have to kill one of them and get their crossbow, because the crossbow will kill these guys in one hit, but otherwise they take like 1,000 fucking bullets. And playing this on hard mode, I could not do it. I tried over and over again, but the enemies just took so much damage to kill, and there's 3 of them. They're all bouncing around, so there's nowhere you can take cover, and their crossbows will kill you in just like one shot. And there's nowhere for you to, like, hide for long enough to heal up because they're chasing after you. So it just felt like insurmountable. Like, I'm sure I could have done it if I tried enough times, but there was nothing fun about this challenge. It just felt like I had to luck out that the enemies didn't position themselves quite right enough for long enough for me to survive, you know? So that was a little bit frustrating. And but overall, again, I ended up enjoying the shootouts just for the sheer amount of variety, just for all the different styles. This game kind of reminded me a little bit of Bayonetta, because not in terms of, like, you know, the combat or anything, obviously, but the theory behind the game, because Bayonetta had been described as non-stop climax when it came out, and that's kind of what Uncharted 2 is like. It's this feeling of, you know, it's always another thing. You think you've rounded the corner, and then another thing shows up, and you're like, oh my god, there's another thing. And there's just bigger surprises in the narrative. Like, the first game had the zombie twist, but that's all it is. There's zombies. You know, wow, the game gets a little spooky for a little bit, I guess. Once you know that they're not that hard to kill, it's not that scary. In this game, you've got these fucking ram-headed demon things that just take forever to kill and don't stop running at you, you know? And so they're way more scary because the actual gameplay is terrifying. It's hard to avoid them. It's hard to take them down, you know? And then you find out that they're just guys in masks, and that's a way better twist. You end up in Shambhala, and there's all these fucking blue dudes running around shooting crossbows at you, and you're like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, it's just a lot more imaginative than, you know, this relic turns people or summons zombies. I don't even know if it turns people into zombies in the first game, but, you know, in the second one, it's like you drink this tree sap from the Tree of Life, and you become a blue, hard-to-kill monster man. Lazarevich is a way better villain than the villains from the first game. He's, you know, like, really intimidating. He kills a lot of people. The only thing that sucks about him, and is probably the worst thing about the story, is that he constantly lets people live for no fucking reason. He's the kind of dumbass villain who, in spite of the fact that he's shown being, like, really cutthroat and brutal, like killing his own men the second they've, you know, wronged him in any way, he'll be like, I leave you guys to kill Drake and fucking Elena. Why? Why didn't he just shoot them dead when he wanted them dead? Like, why does he keep letting them live over and over again? It's also got that problem of people just hesitate to shoot for no reason until something conveniently stops them. It's like, you know, I don't mind convenience in a story. It's necessary for a story to happen. And when you're doing a big dumb action story, then you're going to see a lot of that. But this just makes the characters seem dumb as fuck. It just makes the story unbelievable in a way that I don't want it to be. I don't want, like, and this is totally avoidable. There's no reason that you have to put the characters in a position. Just give them a better reason that they didn't pull the trigger, other than they hesitated for 2 minutes for no fucking reason, or, you know, they wanted to let their lackeys do it. I don't know. It's just, this is so avoidable that it's really hard for me to excuse when this kind of thing shows up in a script. But nonetheless, Lazarevich is still a more entertaining villain. He has like a clear principle of why he's doing what he's doing, and he's just got so much force behind him. It's hard not to be intimidated. And then you've got Chloe and Flynn, who are obvious double crossers. I mean, the whole title of the game is Among Thieves. So right from the beginning, you know this is going to be a back and forth of double crossing, a who do I trust, like everybody's just keeping each other alive until the moment they don't need them anymore kind of thing. Flynn's a total douchebag, and Chloe is like, back and forth. You're never quite sure about her, but in the end, it seems like she's pretty okay. They're fine. Chloe is really fucking hot, so that really helps a lot. I could never really take the dynamic with these guys seriously because it's like obviously we're all gonna betray each other. It's kind of weird that Drake would work with these people who he knows are like this if he's not going to be like that in turn. I don't know if he's just gotten soft or if maybe he just really wasn't prepared for the moment he should be worried. I don't know why he let himself be with two people who were both working for another guy and didn't bring his own backup. It just, again, kind of makes him look dumb. So, yeah, these are issues I have that do impact, like, this is why I can't take the story that seriously. It's like I can say that this is an entertaining movie, but it doesn't have the tightness that makes a movie great, and you don't need to have it be this unclean to make it entertaining. There are movies like, say, and I'm sure that somebody's going to shit on this as an example, but when I think of Inception, that's a fun heist movie that's crazy, action-packed, and all of it seems to logically make sense. There's never a part where you feel like somebody's just holding the idiot ball for no reason. This is based on memory. I haven't seen that movie in a long time, but, it's just keep me not questioning the actions of the characters involved. I don't want to feel like I'm smarter than the characters in my movie, unless the point is that they're dumb, which is not the case here. These characters are all supposed to be really intelligent. They're all witty and bantering, and they can figure out all this crazy shit. They're finding secrets that all these explorers never were able to solve the mysteries of, I want to believe that they're intelligent. But, I do like the dynamic between Chloe and Nate and Elena because it's the first time that we actually have something of like a character arc and some development and some actual thematic stuff in the story. Because basically, what we eventually gather is that Elena and Drake dated for a while after the first game, but seemingly she broke up with him because she was more interested in altruistic pursuits. Now, it's funny because the first game just kind of characterizes her as just some TV... she's not really a journalist in the first game. She's working for just a treasure hunting show, like something you imagine being on the History Channel or something. Like, she doesn't come off as this really serious journalist. She's more of a thrill-seeking, TV personality, and she's just looking for the scoop. She's not in it for any kind of moral reason. Well, in this game, she's become that way. So I'm fine with this. It's a better character. It's something a character you can do something with. A little bit of a retcon, but, whatever. Who's going to go back and play the first game and criticize this? So now she's a journalist who's really serious about tracking Lazarevich because he's this war criminal who NATO apparently thinks is dead, and he's been doing all this crazy shit, and she's trying to get to the bottom of why. Meanwhile, Drake is still a self-serving treasure hunter who murders a lot of people in his line of work, So not exactly a good guy. It's not surprising that if she's going to try to be more of a good guy, Drake has some moral scruples, I'm not going to murder people who are just working at a museum, even though he does throw one of them about 200 feet down into the water at one point in the game. But nonetheless, he tries not to murder people if they're not trying to murder him, I guess. So he's kind of a good guy. He's, he rescues people, and by the end of the game, he saves the fucking world. What a fucking swell guy. I mean, honestly, anytime that this subject comes up of like, oh, you're trying to save the world, like, what are you, gay? It's like, I have to think, well, I mean, if you don't save the world, you are going to die. Like, if you let the bad guy win and they really do take over the world, you're gonna get killed. So it's not like you're necessarily, it's not that it's not self-serving to save the world. It is self-serving because you will be punished if the world is taken over, but nonetheless, he's a good enough guy. Why not? And you've got Chloe, who's this old flame. She's like a sort of Fujiko type character. He's been with this girl on and off over the years. They've done a lot of heists together, and she's kind of a bad girl. She's not like, she's not like a super bad girl. She's just like not morally scrupulous. She's more about just getting the treasure. So Drake is attracted to her, but it's more of just a, we fucking do heists kind of thing. It's a fun thing. Whereas Elena, he actually cares about and is in love with. And, even though he doesn't really want to be a hero, he still finds himself kind of, at the very least, he'll be a hero for her. And by the end, he kind of is like, yeah, well, if I can do something to stop the terror that's coming, then I should. So I guess he's kind of a good guy, and him and Elena end up back together by the end. Oh, how sweet, It's a little bit of character growth, a little bit of development. It happens in an interesting way. I think all the fighting between them, like, so, they when you're in Nepal, Drake and Chloe are working together underneath Lazarevich's nose, trying to find the treasure, and Elena and some douchebag named Jeff just happen to be there doing reporting shit. And Drake's like, I gotta help them out of here. I'm gonna make sure that these two make it out safely. And Chloe's like, what the fuck are you doing? Since when do we protect civilians? We're in a city where a guy has created a civil war on purpose. People are dying all around you. Why are you protecting these two? It's obviously just because you want to fuck this girl, and you're fucking me over by pretending that this is some kind of, like this is some kind of moral crusade. Fuck you. So yeah, I think that was an interesting cause of conflict between them. And there's a whole part where you're in this mountain village, and it looks beautiful, and then unfortunately it gets fucking destroyed, but it's an awesome tank chase sequence. There's just a lot of shit that goes on in this game. Like, I was surprised going back to it at how long it was and how many parts are pretty memorable. Like, I remembered the stuff and was like, man, I just didn't realize, like, I never put it all together. This is all in the same game, You do the train part at the very beginning. You go through the museum where you tranquilize all the guys. The forest part, the initial jungle part, is not very memorable. I would say that one I could take or leave, where you're with Sullivan. And it's unfortunate that Sullivan plays such a small role in this game, but there's a lot of good characters, and it's cool that he's back at all. But then you get to Nepal. That's a really great segment where you're fucking running through buildings as they're collapsing, fighting this fucking helicopter and shit. You cross all over this whole big city, and then you go, through the train depot. You have the long-ass train scene. There's the part where you activate the temple in the center of Nepal, and you're, like, moving the hands on this giant statue. Do this very Zelda-esque mirror puzzle that has, like, a strong sense of verticality. It's like they just took advantage of the fact that it's a fucking video game better. It's like, I feel like in the first game they thought, like, okay, you're a gravedigger. What's, like, a reasonable thing that would exist? Like, what's a reasonable scaled puzzle? Like, what would be in an Indiana Jones movie? Something you could build on a set. And then in the second game, they were like, oh, right, this is a video game. We can make it a, 200-meter tall underground chamber where a giant dagger plunges into a giant guy's chest, and his mouth opens up, and that's the entrance. There's a staircase inside his mouth. That's fucking crazy shit. It's much more Zelda-like, and even then, on a bigger scale than something I think I've seen in a Zelda dungeon. So because Zelda doesn't have these insane climbing mechanics that you're expected to do. So, yeah, that was a better set piece. You go to the mountains. The train part, again, amazing. You replay the part where you climb up the train, do a bunch of fight outs in the snow, then you're in a city in the fucking north, and then you go through these caves, and there's shit in the caves, and there's fucking crazy monkeys. Then you go to Shambhala. Shambhala's beautiful. You do some stuff there. It's just like, man, all of those are good set pieces. Memorable game, pretty fun, gorgeous locales, better characterization, better writing, better direction in the cutscenes. I still don't think it's like a cinematic masterpiece or anything, but at the very least, it's more entertaining, and like they did a better job of having, when they're gonna have a dramatic camera sweep, don't put it at a moment where the player could easily veer in the wrong direction, or don't put if you're gonna have a pit that if you fall down it you will die, don't make it 1 foot away from the thing you're hanging from. Make it a bottomless pit. Like, just, again, still, there's moments where you can jump a 10-foot gap, but then sometimes you can't jump a 2-foot gap, or, something that happens in a cutscene is like, how the fuck did he drop? There's one part where literally the characters jump off of something like 1,000 feet down into a lake that is right after a moment where if you had dropped that same drop into I think it's Nate and Sully jump off a cliff. That's what it is. They jump off of a cliff, and it's like, I could have fallen off of that same exact cliff in the gameplay segment a second ago and I would have died. But Nate and Sully are going to jump off of it in the cutscene. And it's like, I understand that it's a different context, and that really dying is not so much about what would kill the character, but what would be an inaccurate telling of the story, sort of like a Prince of Persia thing, except they don't justify it, in the game. But still, it annoys me. It annoys me that something like that happens, and again, it's so avoidable. And, like, I know not everybody's gonna think of it, but I am, and this is my goddamn review, and I don't give a fuck what anybody else would respond to. This is how I feel about the goddamn game. So, overall, whereas I considered Uncharted 1 to be like a strong 5 to a light 6 on the replay, it was kind of aggravating. It left me feeling kind of hollow. It felt like a game I wouldn't come back to and play again. It wasn't like a negative experience. It was just like a lot of small annoyances on the way through what is otherwise fairly enjoyable, but doesn't really stand out for anything, Uncharted 2, I would give like a strong 7 to a light 8. Even like graphically, like this game, it's not necessarily a huge technical step up from the first game, but there's more personality in the animations. There's more just great visual design, like more memorable locales. It's like because graphical fidelity doesn't matter. Like, it never has, it never will. It's always been about visual design. And if you have a game that has cool looking shit, it doesn't matter how high tech it is. And this game has a lot of cool looking shit in it, but it also has stuff like the train segment that is cool looking and mind blowingly high tech in a different way from just, fidelity of graphics. So, like, the technical impressiveness still holds up to this day, because that is not something that can just be undone by a new console generation. That's something that is just a testament to the effort that they fucking put into it, It's not like that'll ever get easier to replicate. It's just like it's just the thought that went into the programming that makes it so good. So, that's something that will continue to hold up. Even if other games have even more impressive scripted sequences, this one is still a really impressive scripted sequence no matter how much time passes. So, yeah, I think it's a strong game. Again, the biggest hurdles it has are the guns still feel like shit, which is a pretty big problem when there's a lot of shootouts. I still enjoyed the shootouts overall, but God, the guns feel terrible. There's still kind of, a little bit of glitchiness. I don't know if this is just a problem with the HD collection, but there's moments in both games where the sound kept like getting choppy and cutting out randomly. That was obnoxious as fuck. There's some visual glitches that happen here and there, enemies getting stuck in walls or going flying. Parts where I get I get killed because Nate can't quite decide which fucking wall he's attached to, or just annoying stuff like that. But I can forgive some of that. I don't prefer it to be that way, but it's a negative point because there's other games that don't have that issue, so I can't just like let that slide. It's all stuff that I'm going to think about. Like, if I'm going to replay Uncharted 2, I'm going to think, like, why do I want to replay this game? I want to replay it because there are big, epic set-piece moments that are fun and, some decent character writing. But that might not be enough to make me come to this game over another game that has tighter mechanics. So, overall, I'm going to say strong 7 to a light 8, which is a really good score. It's not a bad score by any definition, in case you're wondering. I know there are some people who think in terms of IGN, who for some reason think that, like, when people talk about, like, the whole report card grading as, like, how you should score something, that's retarded. Because if you score everything like a report card, it doesn't account for the fact that you're doing different work. So, like, if I get a 100 on my homework versus a 100 on my quiz, they're not equal. They're not both equally 100. One was homework. It doesn't account for as much as my grade as the quiz does. You see what I mean? So, like, when you're grading something, when you're giving a score to something, you're comparing it to everything else that exists. If I gave another game a 10 and I give Uncharted a 10, I'm implying that they are of the same level of quality. And I don't think that this game is as good as a game I would give a 10 to. So ergo, strong 7 to a light 8. Good at what it's trying to accomplish, but not perfect. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm going to move on to Uncharted 3. I'm really interested to see how this is all going to play out, because I think my reactions to every game are going to be pretty different from each other. So, we'll see how that goes. Uncharted 3 is, in my opinion, an unmitigated disaster. I hate this game. I hated it from pretty much start to finish. Back when the game first came out, I had made it up through the part where you escape from the burning building, and I had just quit. Because the game is... If the first game was like playing a decent video game that is sometimes interrupted by a decent movie, and the second game is like playing a good movie, the third game is just watching a shitty movie and not playing at all, because there's maybe 15 minutes of gameplay in this fucking game. The opening bit is just non-stop railroading you between long-ass, badly written, badly directed cutscenes that take forever. And, like, there are moments, countless moments in this game, where you'll literally watch a cutscene, take 15 steps forward, and watch another cutscene in such a way that makes me wonder, why did you give control to me at all? Why did I even have to move this character? Just play the next fucking cutscene. Or cut all this shit down significantly, because it doesn't need to be there. But I think I understand completely why it's like this. So, as I've heard, this game was being developed at the same time as The Last of Us. And historically, this is not something Naughty Dog Studio did. They're not like a developer who usually makes 2 games at once, but this time they decided to. And apparently a lot of things had to be cut from the game. A lot of ideas didn't go through. But it seems to me like they had to fill in for the things that they cut to make the game as long as people would want it to be. This game is just as long as Uncharted 2, might even be longer. But it certainly felt longer, but I don't think it took me as long to beat, because there's less gameplay segments, so fewer places that you can actually lose and have to start over. But the way that the game is that there's just all these sort of unstructured cutscenes of characters standing around talking, and it makes me think that, well, surely if the cutscene is taking place in the gameplay environment, which most of them are, and all it consists of is characters, moving around doing pretty basic animations, that must be a lot easier to create than building more game. Because the second game had just a crazy amount of locations, of different styles of gameplay, different things going on. The enormous set pieces that started coming and they don't stop coming. Uncharted 3 does not have all that. It does have a lot of locations, but each of them feels completely underutilized. There's not really a ton of interesting art design. In spite of the fact that the graphical fidelity is so high. And I mean, all of the Uncharted games were pretty much near benchmark, moments in gaming graphics. But as I said in the first video, this is something that doesn't age well. The fact that the graphical fidelity is high is always going to have diminishing returns when you come back to these games. And I remember The Last of Us looking even better than this game does, which came out just, not too long afterwards. But the graphics, they still look good, but it's just dated compared to what we would get now, where this, the quality of this game is what like a second party developed game could be on the PS4. But again, what really matters is art design, and Uncharted 2 had that. It had moments that stuck in my mind because of how good they looked, or because of how, interesting the play style was. Like, the part where you're running from a tank and fighting off hordes of dudes in, well-crafted shootout environments, or just the long stretch at the end. Like, Uncharted 2, I kept thinking I was near the end of the game, and then there'd be, like, another long shootout, another big, huge vertical ascent through a puzzle room or something. I'd just be like, oh my god, it keeps going. Uncharted 3, again, is long because of cutscenes. It's long because every time you take 10 steps, you watch the characters talk about what's going on again, and they're so boring. And the new character designs are also really boring. Like, there's 3 new major characters in this game. One of them is literally just Jason Statham. I don't think he's voiced by Jason Statham, but that is his character. He looks and sounds and acts like him. That's fine, I guess. He's probably the more memorable. But then you've got Marlo, the bad guy, who just is like a British Hillary Clinton or something, and she's supposed to be the leader of this like huge shadow organization, but she's not threatening. She just comes off as kind of a petty cunt. She doesn't really end up doing that much in the course of the story. Like, her henchmen are the ones who are always, attacking you at every turn, but like, she doesn't have all these threatening moments the way Lazarevich did in 2. And towards the back end of the game, I'm sure this is probably, due to things that were cut, but like, she just doesn't really do anything for the last like third of the game until dying at the end. Then you've got Talbot, who's just this like soy boy looking wimpy dude who for some reason is really fucking strong. And also he's like the drug man. He carries around wacky drugs that make you fucking hallucinate shit, and man, that leads to some cheesy ass moments. But we're gonna have to go through this game pretty much in order to summarize all the reasons that I think this is not a great game. In fact, I think it's a bad game. I really fucking hate this game. So like, the beginning, like, Uncharted 2 opened up, Drake's hanging from a fucking cliffside in a bombed out train, and you're like, holy shit, this is fucking madness. Uncharted 3 opens up with Drake and Sully trying to make a trade of their ring for a big thing of money. Turns out they're really trying to flesh out Marlo and Talbot so that they can get onto the trail of them, because they have history with these people. So the opening bit basically amounts to just a bar fight. You get into this big, crazy bar fight with a bunch of dudes, and the fighting mechanics are pretty much lifted right out of the Batman Arkham games. It's just, mash the buttons, and it's supposed to be like the flow of how the character moves around that makes it good, I guess. I found the hand-to-hand combat totally boring. There's no strategy, there's no thought. It's very easy, because it always gives you button prompts of what to do. It's just like, press triangle, this guy's attacking you, press triangle, You're always warned of exactly what to do. So there's no sense of challenge, and the way this fight is orchestrated, it's like there's a bunch of stuff in the environment that if you happen to be close to it at the right moment when you're hitting an enemy, then maybe you'll like pick up a pan and hit him in the head with it or something like that. But the way that the enemies come at you, like, it doesn't naturally lend itself to grabbing those things. It's much easier to just mash square until everybody's dead without really moving much. So, like, I maybe 2 or 3 times saw something get grabbed and used as a weapon, but overall, it was just nowhere near as memorable as the start of Uncharted 2. I mean, how could it be? But, like, you have these, like, constant cutting to cutscenes in between fighting, and it takes you out of it, because, like, when I see a cutscene, I'm expecting, like, put down the controller and watch a movie for a while, you know? But then it's just like you watch a little snippet and then you have control, and then you lose control and then you have control. You lose control, you have control. It's really fucking obnoxious. And this fight that you have against all these dudes is going to be repeated like 5 times over the course of the game. Now, the question on my mind as this was happening is, none of these motherfuckers have guns? Like, how easy would it be to just gun us down? And I guess the excuse is supposed to be that nobody's supposed to have guns. I mean, we're in the streets of London, I guess, so we don't want to alert the authorities. We end up in a back alley, and 2 gunshots are fired anyways, and the idea is we got to get out of there before the authorities sort of show up. But, like, it could have, like, from Marlowe's perspective, we literally get shot. This could have just as easily happened, and they clearly make an easy getaway. So it was no big deal if we got shot. Why not just shoot us? And this is going to be a running theme throughout this game of, for no particular reason, no easily justified reason, people just don't have guns, so that there can be these stupid long fist fight scenes that suck. But why? Why have them? Because it's a lot of action that happens in a really small environment. And this is a running theme throughout this game, is that whereas Uncharted 2 seemed to deliberately make every little thing you did take up as much space as possible. Like, when you're in the city in Nepal in the middle of the game, it's like you feel like you really cover this entire fucking city, because you're just constantly moving forward. You're always, you know, on a new ledge, a new crazy thing. You know, you go into a building and you have to restart an elevator, and then you're running from a chopper, and then you fucking are ziplining halfway across town. And I'm sure that the way they make this possible, because I know they don't build out like an entire environment, is probably that they build out like this linear path of the actual playable section of the game, and then just have, you know, a different skybox that looks like you're moving through the city as though it actually existed, but it's really just shifting, you know, the perspective of a skybox, and like each one is probably individually drawn. Like, I don't think they would have had to build out this entire city as like a 3-dimensional space in order to make this possible, but it feels impressive. Uncharted 3 takes the opposite route. It's like you find yourself in a small room and you have to do something that takes up a lot of time. So, for instance, puzzles. Oh my god, I fucking hate the puzzles in Uncharted 3. And I will say that at least they are actually puzzles, because in the first game, you basically would just open up your notebook, it would tell you the answer, and you solved it. It was very clear that the purpose of the puzzles was just to break up the action. It was just there. There's this video that Extra Credits made way the fuck back when they, you know, were interesting, when they talked about differences in kind versus differences in difficulty or something like that. Basically, just the theory of how, you know, in order to make each action scene pop individually, there needs to be some downtime between them, so that you don't feel like you're just doing the same thing all the time. And like, nobody particularly loves those segments, but they, you know, they exist just for pacing reasons. So in Uncharted 2, they made it way better by, you know, changing the different, like, what kind of puzzles you'll do. It's less about like solving a puzzle and more about finding your way around an environment or something, but all of them are interesting in some way. Like, I mean, the big memorable one is when you have to make the giant dagger stab into the guy's heart. It's like the visual design of the room is incredible. Like, you know, it's a memorable moment because of what happens, even if like doing it is not complicated. In Uncharted 3, there's one puzzle early on. There's 2 that are like this, but early on in the game, there's 2 parts where you're just trapped in like a little dungeon room that's not interesting to look at all, and you have to solve a puzzle that is complex in the sense that when you look at it, you can't tell what the fuck you're looking at. And it takes a while to, like, really put together, like, okay, what exactly am I doing right here? Like, what is supposed to be happening? And then once you finally figured out, like, what the puzzle is, then you're like, oh, okay. And then you can solve it pretty easily. You know, it's not really about, like, testing your logical abilities. It's more about just figuring out what the fuck you're looking at, so that you can continue. But it takes way longer. So you're in these puzzle rooms for a long time, and you're in these combat arenas for a long time, and it's just like everything, you know, every gameplay segment just feels like you're in one room for a while, and none of them are particularly interesting. You've got, like, stealth segments that are much easier to fail than they were in Uncharted 2, and when you fail, it becomes like a huge shootout, and the shootouts are... God, they're so often a pain in the ass because in all the Uncharted games, they've had the shotgun guy who takes a little bit longer to kill. Particularly in Uncharted 2, there were these dudes with shotguns who are wearing full body armor and helmets, and, like, you know, they take, like, a full clip to take down, and it makes the fight that much tougher. In this game, those enemies take more than 2 clips of, like, any gun. You could shoot them with a rocket and they still take another rocket to take down. They are so fucking ludicrously overpowered, and they just make the fights frustrating because usually in Uncharted you're dealing with snipers, you're dealing with people all over the place. Every enemy always knows exactly where you are the second combat starts, which has been true in all the games. They immediately have a beat on you. The second you pop your head out, you're getting shot. And in a lot of these situations, they have, like, one-hit kill enemies out there. So it's like, you know, while the snipers, at least, usually they have a red bead that, like, you can get out of the way before they shoot you, there's usually, like, rocket spammers who are just, like, the second you pop out, bam, you get hit by a rocket from a guy you might not even be able to fucking see yet. And again, this has been a problem in all 3 games, but it's just exemplified in this game because not only do you have the rocket spammer, but you've got the fucking guy who takes 3 clips to kill that and he's got a shotgun. And so by the time, like, you're trying to, you know, gun him down before he gets too close while also worried about all these other shit. And, like, the gun variety just kind of sucks in this game as well. Like, I felt like the loadouts were better in 2. The standard pistol in this game, and I'll say this, the one, like, thing I can definitely praise this game on is they made the guns feel a lot better. Finally, they have, like, way better sound effects, way more kickback, rumble in the controller. Like, the guns finally feel okay to use, but they don't really animate the enemies that well when they get hit. So, like, the sensation of actually hitting an enemy is still not satisfying, and for some reason, the starting handgun is the most inaccurate piece of shit in the world, where you can have it aimed directly at a guy's head, and somehow the bullet misses. And, like, this was not the case in any of the other games. You always, like, I mean, standard practice in a cover shooter is that the starting pistol has it's weaker, and it has a shittier reticule, but if you can get headshots, then you can always make it through with the starting pistol, which is what makes it so satisfying to use. In this game, you've got the starting pistol, and it fires slower than the one in the last game. It misses half the fucking time, so there's basically no advantage to using it, and you frequently have this, like, the submachine gun, you know, the machine gun pistol, which in the last 2 games, the idea was that it had a bigger clip, but it's less accurate because it's just spraying all over the place. Somehow it's more accurate than the starting pistol in this game. So if you have the option of the SMG, you always take it. You're never going to use that starting pistol if you can help it because it's so fucking ass. And, like, usually you have options. So, like, it's not like you're getting stuck with it and having to make do. But it's just frustrating to use because it's so inaccurate. And you feel like you shot a guy in the head and he's not dead for some reason. Oh my god. So, like, you know, you've all the other guns are fairly, all the mid-range weapons are interchangeable. You know, the shotguns are better, finally, I guess. Again, all the guns feel better, but just the shooting galleries are not well designed. And they were in the second game, where, like I said in that review, you had so many unique ways that you had to progress through an action scene. And in 3, it always just kind of feels like a random smattering of chest-high walls and dudes. Like it's about on the level of the first game, but even then, the first game had more shooting galleries that were at least challenging in, I don't know if they were challenging in more interesting ways, but like it was just less frustrating than it was in this game, where you've got the rocket spam happening all the time, the guys who take 3 fucking clips, like every fight I'm just like, oh my god, I can't believe I had to fucking kill this fucking dude. Occasionally there would be something shaken up, particularly towards the end of the game. It got a little bit better, like everything from when you arrive in the desert village onwards, I thought was the best part of the game, because at least there are some shootouts where you can do things like destroy pillars to like knock a guy down, or there's a fight that takes place in like low visibility, even though for some reason all the enemies can see you but you can't see them, whatever, but like there's so many moments that have parallels to the second game and are just worse. Like, for instance, in the second game, there's this amazing bit where you're like in a convoy and you have to climb from car to car, like killing people in the cars, shooting guys in other cars, taking out motorcycles and shit, and making your way up the convoy. And I mean, it's fairly scripted. I mean, usually you kill a guy on the truck and then that truck's kind of out of commission. You got to jump to the next one. It conveniently is, right where you need it to be. But at least it felt somewhat like free flowing, and there was some strategy involved, because you can't just freely jump from truck to truck. You're stuck on a truck if there's nothing else nearby, and you got to take out enemies. The situation progresses, and different things happen as it goes along. In Uncharted 3, there's a part where you're on horseback, and there's a convoy. And the thing is, you can just constantly get onto a truck and then back onto your horse, which sounds cool, except that what it leads to is just one by one taking out each truck. You can either follow behind them and just shoot the guys who are on the backs of the truck, and then move to the next trucks and shoot the guys in the back of those trucks from your horse, or you can board the truck, kill the guy, get back on your horse, board the next truck, kill a guy, get back on your horse. There are some motorcycles here and there. It just doesn't have that same shakeup, the same intensity, the same strategizing that happened in 2, and there's nothing that even compares to the train section at all. So you're expecting there to be like a step up, like what set piece is going to one up the ones from the second game. And there are set pieces that are epic in theory, but the gameplay is just hold forward and, press X occasionally. So the starting bit, after the bar fight, you have to play as Kid Drake. You're in a memory scene that teaches you about how him and Sully first met. This part is super fucking boring and not interesting at all. You're walking around as a kid in a fucking museum, don't give a shit. The game it has this way of just dropping you in media res into situations all the time, and you aren't really given a reason to care. So you're just kind of like, why am I stuck walking? What's going on? And then eventually you start to learn what's happening. But like, it takes place in Spain, and like it's a gorgeously realized vision of a Spanish town, and I can see again how if you were playing this game right when it came out and the graphics are just blowing you away, you might be like, wow, look at these graphics. But I'm looking at it like, I'm walking through a bunch of linear corridors through this city, playing as some kid, and I have to walk. Like, when I think about, I could go play Yakuza, and I could freely explore through the streets of an amazing rendition of Tokyo. And, like, that would be awesome. I would love to have, the graphics don't need to be as good as this, necessarily. I just want to be able to wander around town and explore and look at things. But instead, I just feel like I'm on a linear set path through a fake-ass town. There's nothing inherently interesting about looking at a Spanish town. Why do I care that they lovingly recreated Spain inside of this game? It's just Spain, I can go look at photos of the fucking place. I don't need a video game to one-to-one recreate it so I can walk through it as some kid who I know he is Drake, but I don't give a fuck about what's going on with him narratively at this point in time. Kid Drake, of course, has all the abilities of adult Drake. All the same upper arm strength and everything. But it boils down to there's a chase scene, and there's a bunch of chase scenes in this game. They're all exactly the same. It's always either chase or run away, and you just go on the set path. If you deviate from the path, you die. So just make sure you follow the set path as closely as possible. It happens over and over again. And like, these are meant to be the set pieces, because these are the parts where you do cover like a larger area. But again, there's nothing interesting about them. You're just going in a straight line. And it's particularly frustrating at this one where you chase Talbot through the streets of, I think, Syria or something, like around halfway through the game. And it would be really impressive because you cover a huge area and you're running through, again, all these gorgeously detailed, realistic depictions of places in this city, but none of it looks particularly interesting, and you blast through it all so fast that you don't have time to take it in. So it's like, wow, I sure am just hauling ass through all this whole gorgeous environment that I would actually, appreciate not having to walk through, but maybe do something in. Like, I love video game towns. I love to play like RPGs where I just wander around a town and talk to people. And I think about like playing Final Fantasy IX or something and arriving in like the huge city with the airships and just wandering around that town for hours, talking to random people, finding out what's the culture like here, learning shit about the place, really getting to live there. And, there might not be like crazy graphical fidelity, but the artwork is beautiful because it's handcrafted by somebody with an imagination behind it. And, it's gorgeously drawn, and the characters have connections to the city. In this game, I'm just blasting ass through on a linear path that there is no deviation from for like 5 straight minutes through a gorgeously rendered version of a town that really exists, or at least a facsimile of the architecture and style of a town that is real. So, like, what's the point? Is basically what I'm saying. And it feels like the developers of this game were always asking themselves, like, they were always realizing what they could do and not thinking about whether they should. It's like, oh yeah, in theory, we could have a part where you escape from a burning house, like a burning mansion. But the mansion in itself is not visually interesting. It's just a mansion in a jungle in Spain or France. You're there for a while because this is where you solve the stupid puzzle with Sully. And, like, there's this part where the bad guys start burning the building down and you have to escape from the burning building. Well, you're in a burning building. You're surrounded by fire. What do you got to do? Follow the linear path. Now, in this one, they actually do throw enemies at you. But like many of the scenes that are, like, chase scenes with enemies in this game, again, it's just a random spattering of enemies and chest-high walls. It's just, like, 5 guys you got to take out on your way through, and it becomes really frustrating in these moments because the controls don't really work well for these kinds of frantic scenarios, because in this game they have finally reached the point where Drake is too over animated. And like, I complained about this even as far back as the first game, but in this one they're really trying to make sure that he never has like any jerky movement. Everything is smooth and flowy, and it takes him a whole second to fucking turn around. He has to put his hands on things that he comes in contact with. And so, like, because of all that, he sometimes can't decide which animation is the best one for the moment. So, like, when I want to go behind cover, I want him to snap behind cover. I want to click the circle button and have him go, boop, right into the cover. But in this game, sometimes, for no reason, he'll just, like, saunter over. Like, he'll take his time to get behind the cover when I'm getting shot at because the animations have gotten mixed up. It's like, oh wait, which situation is this? Like, because there's just so many different reactions to so many different types of cover and situations. It becomes a nightmare. So, like, you're trying to quickly take out 5 guys and then jump across a ledge, but, like, the controls are getting confused because, you had to spin around to kill a guy who was behind you, and then you turn back around and try to make the jump, but now you haven't built up momentum, so the jump falls flat, even though sometimes you don't have to. It's just like, where's the camera facing at the moment you press the circle button, or the X button, because that might determine what kind of jump or how the game interprets where you are in the level. I don't even know. I don't know what is the programming issue. I just know know that this game was glitchy as fuck, and that I felt like I was wrestling with my character a lot of the time. So the whole fucking burning building thing I just found frustrating. And again, there was nothing like tactically interesting about it, nothing interesting from a gameplay perspective. It was just either a very generic shootout or climbing on beams, which I've been doing for 2 whole games now. Okay, there's fire this time, but like, what does that mean from a gameplay perspective? And 2, the gameplay was always shifting, not just the place that I'm holding forward through. This is the same case when it comes to the whole shipwreck scene halfway through the game, where you have this whole part where you're in a God, I could go on. I literally feel like this is going to take me an hour to complain about everything because there's just so much. And I'm jumping around all over the place because stuff's just coming into my head, and I get mad about it. Like, in the shipwreck part, first of all, you're in the scene, and once again, you have to do a fist fight with a bunch of guys. And up until this point in the game, there is some level of justification for why people didn't have guns. This time, there's none. You're fighting a bunch of pirates in the middle of a fucking, like, crate room in a abandoned, like, ghost ship in the middle of a ship graveyard that they're using as a base for some fucking reason, and nobody has guns, just so that you can have a fist fight, which always ends the same way. At the end, there's always some big motherfucker, and you fight him, and it's the same fight every single time. You have to fight, like, I think 8+ of these big dudes throughout the game, who are, by the way, impervious to bullets. So you can shoot them in the fucking face before they come up to you to start the fight. Because there's like 2 encounters where you do have a gun on you when you have to fight one of these big guys. Because it's not the end of just a big fist fight, it's at the end of a gunfight. And you can shoot them in the fucking face and it does nothing. But if you punch them enough times, they die. What in the fuck were they thinking? So you fight all these guys, and then you encounter probably what to me was the most egregious moment in the entire game. The biggest way that I saw that they had not spent the amount of time with this one that they had with the first 2. And it was when, after you beat up all these guys, you have to escape from this room. So you climb up the walls, and then there's this sort of like section of like a metal bridge that's hanging from the ceiling. And you jump and you grab onto it, and you're walking along the bottom of it. And the idea is that it starts to break. So you have to swing from this thing over and grab a chain, and then use the chain to swing to the other side of the room. Now, after you jump off the thing and grab the chain, the bridge section you were on falls. It falls from the ceiling. Now, this happens all the time in Uncharted, where whatever you were just climbing on breaks right after you leave. You know, it's always just like a dramatic point of no return. It happens constantly. You can't go back. You got to go forward. So that's fine and all. But I swing from the chain and I miss the ledge, and then I land on the ground. Now, historically in Uncharted, any time you were at a situation where a point of no return thing had happened behind you, you would die if you fell. Because otherwise it makes no sense for you to go back and do the same thing again if it was broken. So I'm on the ground, and the fallen bridge section is next to me on the ground, and I'm like, well, what the fuck? Like, how am I going to get up there if that thing broke? And I clearly fucked up the swing. So I climb back up, and there's just another section of bridge hanging there. There is now one on the floor and one in the sky. And I thought, oh boy, that is immersion breaking. Not that I was immersed, but like, this is something they were so careful to never let happen up until this point. It was even arguably unreasonable some of the time in the other games, where, you know, Drake would die from a fall that was like nowhere near the falls that he regularly takes, you know, in cutscenes, or even just parts of the game where it wants you to fall. So, you know, in that sense, I guess it's nice that they didn't do something that made no sense, but why even have the thing break if it was just going to come back? Really dumb. That wasn't the only time that I got really pissed at a scripted sequence. There was one part, right after the house that burns down. You go to like this castle in Syria, and you're supposed to climb up the wall. Well, I got onto a ledge, and there was like a breaker on the wall just like 5 feet to the right of me. A distance that you regularly would jump in these games and grab onto, and it looked like something to grab onto. So I jump, and I fall, and I die. And I'm like, weird, because it definitely looks like that's going to be a grabbable ledge. So I come back, and I go up instead. I realized that I was supposed to continue going up. So I go up, and I start going to the right, and then the ledge that I'm on breaks, and I fall and grab the breaker box. So the breaker box was the place to go. And mind you, when I jumped and died, I went right past the thing. You know, like, I would have been able to grab it if the game had let me grab it, but it didn't. Because it wanted me to do things in this particular order that leads to the scripted sequence, except that if I was going to end up on the breaker box anyways, what difference does it make if I grab it now versus later? They didn't even have to change anything. They could have just made it so if you go up, it breaks and you fall down, or you just grab the breaker box and you don't have that stupid little moment that means nothing. Why would they put it so close that you could jump to it? Just put it further away. And it was like, it just felt like, did they not play test this? Did they not have somebody try it? And then they go, oh shit, we put that too close. It looks like the ledge you're supposed to grab onto, you know? Like, again, it's not that this is like such a huge deal, just that the first 2 games never made this mistake. So it's really baffling that we're on Uncharted 3 and suddenly these sloppy design decisions are happening, you know? So, and I'm sure again that this is all due to the fact that, yeah, it was a game being developed at the same time as another game that had all these issues of, I guess they bit off more than they could chew, but the product is, in my opinion, terrible. So, again, going back to earlier, because I am totally jumping all over the place now, you know, we had young Drake part, and then after that, you have the first long section of the game. Now, in Uncharted 2, the first long section is the museum break-in, where you and Flynn have to knock out all these guards and climb your way up this museum to try and get to the thing you need. And it's pretty cool because you frequently see the full scale of the museum. It's this big, interesting compound, really neat architecture. You know, it doesn't look like a place that probably really exists. If it does, I'd love to go there because it's really cool. You take out all these guards and stuff, and you're there for a considerable amount of time. You feel like you really, you know, get a sense of this place. And it's not like the best part of the game or anything, but it's a pretty memorable location. In Uncharted 3, your first long section is this break into the compound of where Marlowe's base is. And, like, it starts off, you're just in, like, a service tunnel, and then you enter some just nondescript building, and Drake and Cutter are like, oh, this is, this metalwork must be, like, 18th century, whatever. And it's like, well, it doesn't really look like anything. It just looks like I'm in a dark building. So you climb through that, and then you go through another tunnel, and, like, it's, you know, you're in there for 1 second. You go to another tunnel, and you're in another building, and they're like, oh, this looks like 16th century. And, like, I guess the idea is that they had tunneled through all these buildings and, like, connected them in this network or something, but it just feels like you're in a cave. There's nothing special about it. It doesn't look interesting. You have shootouts with guys just in a sewer. It's not like a cool sewer. Again, the visual direction here is just basically feels non-existent. And finally, you get to Marlowe's, like, I guess, hideout, and that place it's full of all these artifacts, but, like, this is Uncharted. There's random artifacts everywhere all the time, and none of them are ever anything special because, again, they're supposed to look realistic. They're meant to look like real historical artifacts, which are generally, you know, generic and boring. Like, most cultures have just kind of put the same shit on shit. I guess if you're a history nerd, maybe it could be exciting. Maybe even hearing them talk about the architecture would be exciting for a history nerd. But for me, as just a gamer who wants to look at cool things, this part of the game was totally boring. And again, constantly interrupted by cutscenes. And, like, I didn't mind so much in the first 2 games, like, the constant, you hold open this door and I'll go through, because I figure those are all just hiding loading screens. Like, there's a lot of these scenes where you do, like, a pulley, and then one guy will hold the door open while you slip through, and it takes a little bit, and it's like, and they always end with like the door, dramatically closing right behind you. I figure those are just covers for loading screens, and the game otherwise has no loading screens. So like, it's a good way to make something more interesting than watching a dial roll. But in this game, again, you will take 15 steps and go into another cutscene, or you'll leave a cutscene, walk through one of those doors, and then have another cutscene. And it's like, what are we loading in the cutscenes? Is that what's happening? Why are there so many cutscenes? Why? There's so fucking many cutscenes, and they are so fucking unnecessary. So much repeated information. So much characters just standing around. Not even well directed. Like, the cinematography of the cutscenes in 2 was pretty good. And all of them felt like they were progressing the narrative in some kind of meaningful way. In this game, it's like they came up with more stops along the trail just to have more cutscenes of characters. Like, let's say you're playing Uncharted 2, and they find out that, like, oh, this sigil indicates a chapel we need to get to. So you spend like 15 minutes crossing the city to get to this chapel, and they get there, and surprise, there's nothing there. And everybody's like, well, what the hell? What's going on? And then you solve some puzzle, and then it's like a cutscene activates, and the character's like, oh, turns out this was just another hint. We have to go to somewhere else. In this game, it'll be like you arrive in an area, you go into a room, and the character's like, what's going on? There's nothing here. And then Drake goes, oh, look at this thing. There must be something in this room that will indicate something else. So then you all scour the room, and then another cutscene activates. Oh, it was this piece of paper, which means we have to go to the next part of this building. Then you run to that part of the building, another cutscene activates. It's just like, it's incessant. It's like a whole story arc being condensed into like every 15 minutes, and they're all unnecessary. So the Syria place, it's just a really generic castle. And then you got the stupid drug shit. So, like, Cutter gets drugged with something, and it's, like, implied that he's, like, having an acid trip, and he's tweaking out. It doesn't really lead to anything. It's basically just to set up the drug so that it'll come back later. But there's a bunch of cutscenes about it. Then you get drugged, like, halfway through the game, and it just makes the whole world all wobbly and kooky. And again, it's another segment where you just hold forward as Drake walks through a bunch of linear corridors, but they're all wobbly and kooky, and you're hearing fucking Talbot's voice in your head for some reason, and it just is, it's like, what even is this? What is this drug? What is this magic retarded drug that makes the world all wobbly? I mean, speaking as somebody who's taken acid, it certainly doesn't look like this. And then this is all, of course, building up so that at the end of the game, when you're in the final level, Drake spends a while being drugged, and it presents that the enemies are turning into Inferno Cop and becoming twice as hard to kill. So at least there's some gameplay ramification, and it was kind of a way to keep alive the tradition of having something supernatural happen at the end of the game, except it turns out it's not real. You were just hallucinating it all. The hallucination makes no sense, just a bunch of random shit. You hallucinate you're back in your hometown, and like you just see all this stuff that just has there's no logical reason a drug would make you see all this shit. Like, it's just like a false understanding of how drugs work. Not that I think most people understand that, so I'm sure they get away with it on those grounds. But, oh boy. I'm trying to think of what happens immediately, because you're in that castle for a long stretch. Like, it's a huge part of the game. It's just this castle and a cave underneath it. And then, God, there's a part where there's, like, enemies just spamming rockets at you incessantly, and you have to take them all out with a sniper. But, like, there's so many moments where, like, you get killed by a rocket from somebody who just spawned in or who you couldn't possibly have seen before. It's so frustrating. I'm trying to think where I am, because you teleport around all the time in this game. Like, it's always just like, zip, suddenly you're in a new place. Yeah, I did the ship. Yeah, again, the whole sinking ship part is just like another hold forward and press X occasionally bit. Whoa, the ship's turning upside down. That's crazy. But, like, again, these are all set pieces that sound cool on paper. They just don't lead to anything new in the gameplay, which is it makes it so it just all bleeds into each other. It's just another thing is falling apart that Drake is escaping from. I really don't care. Like, it's not that visually impressive. It's not like shot well. It's just you holding forward and pressing X. Again, it feels like I'm watching a movie, not playing a movie in this game. You end up in the desert, and there's about 10 minutes of you holding forward while Drake walks through a desert. And this is something that could, like, the idea is he's like, whoa, he's hallucinating, it's so hot, he's, oh, where's Sully, I need to find him. It goes on for way too long. It's not that interesting. There's like a voiceover at one part saying all this weird pretentious shit. I don't know what that was about. I don't know if he was supposed to be hallucinating that or if it was just like a flare that they thought would be cool. It's boring. The whole section is boring. It could have just been a cutscene that would have been like a minute long. Like, it's a cliche. We all know that you see mirages in the desert. It's not funny. It's not quirky. It's everything in this game pisses me off. Finally, when you get to the desert village, that's when, again, you get like the few pretty okay shootouts. Then you have the whole horseback section, which, like, in this one, like in the last game, you arrive at the snowy village after the big set piece on the train, and you have a while where you wake up in the village, you explore it a little bit, you walk around behind this guy, and again, it's a more interesting walking around scene because it's a mountain village that doesn't exist in reality and has like a distinctive kind of culture that you've never heard of, and like, I still think it's kind of a boring section, but I get that the point of it was to have this slow moment after like the most exciting thing in the game had just happened and to endear you to the village on some level before you continue. But like, you meet new characters, you have some cutscenes, you do this long bit where you're in a crypt hanging out with this guy who's like your guy, your number 2 guy. He doesn't speak English, but he's a bro, and he helps you through this whole fucking long level. And then you and him combat this tank, and you're running through the village, it's getting destroyed, all of his fucking friends are dying, he's trying to find his daughter, and you're blowing up this tank, like, hoping you're gonna get to it, and the tank's going crazy, going through walls and shit. It's a good section, and it feels well-paced. In this game, a bunch of Arab dudes show up out of nowhere and rescue you in this town situation. There's one cutscene of you with the guy who introduces himself, explains what's really going on, and then the two of you are on horseback following a convoy. After the convoy scene is over, guy disappears, comes back briefly at the end of the game. Don't give a single fuck. This guy mattered not at all. He's totally a plot convenience. Again, maybe they wanted to do more with him, but it comes off as really forced and cheesy. And then you go to the final place, and it's just a retread of what happened in the second game. But in the second game, you go to this huge underground city, and it's all beautiful and shining, and it's a paradise lost, But it's full of these crazy blue guys who still live there, and they're all fucking terrifying, and they jump around and claw at you, and they use crossbows, and you have all these interesting action sections where you have to fight them and the regular bad guys at the same time, and make tactical decisions about who to kill when. And you make a journey through most of this place. Like, it's like just as long of a section as the other sections do a town. In the third game, you enter this big underground city. Drake drinks some water and starts tripping balls. You fight a bunch of flaming headed dudes, which doesn't take very long. Again, no strategy. You just kind of blow them all away with whatever the strongest weapon you have is. These fights are kind of annoying, but at least they're a little different. There is a part where you're like really tripping and fighting dudes, but it doesn't affect the gameplay at all. It just makes the environment look wobbly and crazy. And then like once you stop tripping, you do a few more regular shootouts. You shoot some guys who are trying to cross a bridge, and there's snipers. It's just like any other shootout in the game. Nothing unique. Like the part where you have to fight like the 6 snipers in the second game, and like the towers that they're on blow up after you kill them, and then guys start crossing the bridge, and you gotta, like, they're on like a little wobbly plank, and you're like trying to strategize am I taking out the snipers or the big dudes with shotguns who are coming across the bridge who are scarier? And in this one, it's just like a regular bridge shootout like you've done 1,000 times. You make it to the end. The final boss is just another fucking fist fight with Talbot on like a crumbling thing. He falls off. Marlowe dies in quicksand, which is hilarious. um, there's a fake out that Sully's gonna die. So I guess I should address the story, since I've just been bitching about the gameplay the whole time. And there's so many cutscenes. Surely there's a compelling story. No. Most of the cutscenes are, again, just, oh, well, we didn't find the thing here, we gotta go there. Cutter is an okay character. He's just kind of a nice guy. I like that he's like a history nerd along with Drake. It gives him something to bounce off of. Like, I could see him being... He's a character who I was endeared to enough by his personality that if he was, in another game, I'd be like, hey, Cutter's back. Chloe doesn't really do anything or have any development. She's just there for the first half just to be there. But like the main thing that's the main thematic thread through this game is that Drake is pushing things too far. That like this particular mission is more dangerous than the other ones they've been on because Marlowe is running this big organization and they're always one step ahead of them. They're always like barely escaping death. Not that it seems that different from what you did in the last two games, but point being, everybody's like, oh, I don't know, Drake. Seems like your pride is driving you this time. Seems like, you would have turned away from this mission normally, but because it's about... this matter of pride, you're continuing to pursue it. Because in the other two games, there were points where it was like, oh, we've gone too far, let's quit. But in the first one, you were trapped, and in the second one, it's like a moral thing. In the third one, it's just like, oh, Drake's pride is propelling him onwards. So everybody keeps telling you like, oh, you're gonna get Sully killed. Like not even subtly, they're just like, yeah, if you keep doing this, you're gonna get Sullivan killed. But Sully's, he's got your back. He's basically your dad, your de facto dad, as you find out. And like the scene that you have with him as a kid is pretty good. Does a good job of establishing how these two ended up together and like what their relationship is like. All the scenes with Marlowe and Talbot are fucking terrible. They're awful villains. They're boring. They're shitty, shit-eating shitbags. So, but like you have this scene with Elena, and like in this game, apparently you guys got married after the second game, but you've been separated or divorced. It's unclear. And it's just over, I guess, the same reason you were broken up in 2, just that Drake doesn't want to stop adventuring and being an asshole. And Elena is just still doing the reporter life. So there's some heartfelt moments with them, and of course at the end of the game there's a moment where it seems like Sullivan has been killed. And because the whole game has been telegraphing it up to this point, it's pretty believable. You're like, oh shit, they did it, they killed Sully. But then it turns out it was all a drug trip illusion. So that's a good twist, I guess. Like, it's nice that Sully didn't die in this shitty game, because that would be unfortunate. And that, that all that telegraphing wasn't just to lead to the incredibly obvious thing that seemed like it was going to happen. And the fact that he's portrayed as unambiguously dead. Because, like, you don't start seeing really trippy shit until after Talbot hits you with this smoke. So it's implied that you're tripping because of the smoke, when the reality is you're tripping because you had drank this water before, Sully died. Some people probably saw through it. I didn't. I was like, oh, this is clever. I guess technically you saw trippy shit before that because you saw people turning into fucking Inferno cops, but you're just kind of assuming that that's what the secret here does, So it's a good way to use the twists from the ends of the previous games to inform the twist in this game. But once you stop tripping and you realize that the problem here is just that the water makes you trip balls, now there is no supernatural element, and it's kind of like the stakes have been reduced right before the end of the game. It's like you've gone from thinking you're fighting all these crazy super soldiers to just a couple of final shootouts that are normal, and then an escape scene from the crumbling city that's, just another one. It's not even that long. So, story-wise, I think it's an interesting take to put Drake in a position where his pride is putting his friends in danger and, like, everybody sees it but him. But then, like, when he's at the midpoint, when after Sully's been captured, he, like, really recognizes what a fool he's been, reconciles with Elena, and the two of them are probably going to settle down and go be normal now. That's all fine and good. That is, like, 30 minutes worth of the cutscenes in this game that has, like, I would have to estimate 7 fucking hours of cutscenes. I mean, playing this game was like marathoning all the Transformers movies in a row. It's like, it's insanely long and bad. And it's mostly just watching a movie. So I was really just bored out of my mind for so much of it, that like whatever little character beats it had that were okay, whatever couple of shootouts weren't annoying, or, you know, set pieces that were I didn't care for any of the set pieces. Like, there was nothing in this game that would make it worth returning to, because the second game did everything so much better. Like, the convoy scene is not as good. There's nothing that's like the train scene. None of the shootouts are as fun. Escaping from the sinking ship would have been cool, and like the water physics look neat and shit, but you know, again, there was nothing unique gameplay wise. It felt like something I experienced once and I don't need to experience it again. There were some shootouts leading up to that when you're in the ship graveyard, where you had to like use water and climb up on boats. That would have been a really cool shootout if not for the fact that everything was fucking glitching out for me in that shootout. Like, Drake, I don't know, something about the environment there was just giving him a lot of trouble, or like parts of the water would glitch out. And this could also be because I was playing this I played all these in the Nathan Drake collection. I don't know if it's a shitty port. The audio cutting out issue was happening in all three games. So that was a pain, but yeah. Overall, really hated this game. I would give it like a strong 2 to a light 3. I would not play it again. I basically played it just so that I could see the story leading into Uncharted 4, because I've heard a lot of good things about Uncharted 4. I've seen stuff that looks good. It looks like they fixed all of my issues with 3, so I'm excited to give it a shot. But yeah, I would never play 3 again. I hate it, and I hope that it becomes remembered as a bad game, because I think at the time it came out, people were just kind of let down. People were like, oh, well, it's not as good as 2, but oh, it's still graphically insane, and oh, the part where you escaped from the boat was neat, but like, people weren't thinking about what 2 actually was and what 3 actually is, I think. And I hope that there's also people who hate the Uncharted games just group them all together as all just being, it's just a playable movie. No, there's a huge difference. This game sucks. Well, we've come to the end of this long and at times arduous journey through the Nathan Drake quadrilogy, is that how you say it, of Uncharted games. And I gotta say, Uncharted 4 is legitimately a great game. In fact, it brought back the feeling that I had when I played Uncharted 1 way back. I mean, I'm not gonna go through it and obsessively play it on each harder difficulty again. I did play it on hard mode up until the final battle, but we'll get into that later. Yeah, it was a solid, fun experience that in many ways felt to me like the graduated, maybe not final form of what's possible with this franchise, but definitely the sequel I was waiting for. The one that fixed most of the issues I had with previous games, felt like a natural evolution, and really delivered on a lot of the stuff that I think these games have been hyped for this whole time. I think it was a better execution. Like, it was closer to the way people have been describing it from the beginning. And I'm like kind of proud of it in a way. It's like, I played it and I was like, man, you actually did it. You actually lived up to this game series reputation in a way that the third game utterly failed to do, in my opinion. And that game was still very critically praised. To my surprise, like, I think in games journalism, maybe up until recently, I think this is starting to change a little bit, but it just seemed for a long time like if there was a certain amount of stuff in a game that like looks really good and just like on paper when described is good, then people will say it's a good game, regardless of like the nitty gritty of the execution and like how, you know, really thinking about it. Uncharted 4, this is where it excels, is that it really is good in the ways that matter. For instance, gunplay, unbelievably, is finally good in Uncharted 4. The guns feel good to use. In fact, the starting pistol feels good to use. Unbelievably. The like basic, most common pistol that you'll use throughout the game. It sounds right. It feels right when you fire bullets. When enemies get hit, they react the way you would want them to react. Shooting people actually feels good in this fucking game in a way that it hasn't in any of the others so far. And I know a lot of this is because of The Last of Us, because you can see a lot of the blood of The Last of Us has gotten mixed into Uncharted in this game. In fact, it's apparent right from the title screen, because it completely breaks with the aesthetic of previous title screens, and has the same aesthetic as The Last of Us title screen. The fixation on somewhat older, more mature themes, older characters, exploring the problems that might reach someone who's in their 40s, as opposed to the usual game protagonists of, well, I guess game protagonists do tend to be older, they just don't really face realistic issues most of the time. Not that Drake necessarily faces realistic issues, but ones that are grounded and relatable, and he finally feels like a real character in this game. Like, he's been fleshed out to a point where you have a complete picture of who he is, why he is the way he is. He finally makes sense in a way that he never really did before. And so because of that, he's able to have a much more emotional arc in this game. And I'm not going to say that the writing is perfect. There is still some cheesiness. There's still some unbelievability in the way that characters act. Mostly just characters being stupid for convenience, which has been a thing throughout all these games. But it's almost more jarring when everything else is so well done. Like, the dialogue in this game is a lot better than it's ever been. And there are a couple groaners, and I'll get into that. But overall, I just felt like if the reputation of these games is supposed to be that they have a great story, great dialogue, and great characters, this one actually has those things. And it's not that I think the characterization was ever bad in these games. I think that a lot of it came down to the performances, the sort of aesthetic persona of these characters. Each of them they're kind of inherently interesting, particularly like Sully in the first game. Like, you automatically like him because he's this surly old cigar swilling dude, who's got a great voice, and he's just like a character archetype that's existed forever, but done well enough that you go, yeah, I love that guy, And then in the second game, with the introduction of Chloe and Flynn, they were, again, archetypes, but well done. The third game, I'll give him Charlie Cutter was charming, but otherwise, he was just Jason Statham. This game not only breathes new life into some of the existing characters, but the new characters that are introduced are good. They feel like, they're compelling. They have something to them that you can sink your teeth into. And moreover, the overall game design has just been ironed out a lot. It recaptures the magic of really both the first two games in ways I was surprised. So in the second game, I talked about how it felt like this non-stop climax feeling. Like, you're always traveling, you're always doing something new and different, and it's just very explosive and bombastic. But I do think that the second game, what it lacks in comparison to the first, is really getting engrossed in a setting. You don't have that experience like you did in the first game, where you're on this island, you're really trying to get to the bottom of the mystery of this treasure, and you spend a lot of time here and you kind of get to know the place. And granted, I don't think it did an exceptional job, but in Uncharted 4, you start off with more of the Uncharted 2 globetrotting, going to different places and, seeing crazy set pieces. And then around the halfway point, the rest of the game takes place on one island that you really get to see all of. You really explore this place, and the mystery at the heart of it is actually engaging. So for me to really talk about it, I think I'm going to have to make a lot of comparisons to previous games. So in the first game, you're trying to find El Dorado that Sir Francis Drake had found previously. And the only real connection between the ongoing story that you're playing and, the mystery you're trying to uncover is that Drake is supposedly Sir Francis Drake's descendant. So there's a little bit of interplay when you find, remnants of Drake, when you eventually find his corpse, and, there's some relationship to the plot, but, most of what's going on the island is pretty boring. And Uncharted has always had this issue of, in trying to make the historical stuff realistic, it's boring. It might be interesting for history nerds if, like, you already have context into what all this stuff is and why it's cool that there's, German U-boats in the jungle, or, like, all this different stuff that harkens to interesting history, but isn't told in an interesting way in the story itself. You pick up treasures that are just nonsense, so it never felt like that. I was not invested in the story of what had happened here, the mystery of why El Dorado, was transported to all these places, stuff like that. In the second game, there's a little bit more intrigue once you get to Shambhala and you realize that, everybody thinks it's the stone that created all these powerful leaders throughout time, but it turns out it was actually the water in this place. And you've got, the local natives and stuff, and, it gives you a sense of, it doesn't tell you too much, but it also doesn't tell you enough. It's like you kind of get a taste. You're like, okay, this is cool and mysterious. It's a nice aesthetic thing to have presented. But again, you're not, that deeply invested. The third game, I don't even fucking remember why they were going to the city at the end. I've already tried to blot most of that out of my memory, and I just played it a couple days ago. But in Uncharted 4, you're tracing the history of this, basically the Pirate King. Was it Thomas Avery? Forgive me if I forget everyone's names. I'm not well-versed in pirate stuff. But, the fact that the people that you're chasing, the treasure that you're chasing, belongs to pirates is thematically relevant to the characters, who are themselves essentially pirates. They're treasure hunters, And, the more you learn about the history of what went on with these pirates, you start to get a picture of what exactly, they were culturally, what they were trying to do by establishing this paradise for pirates called Libertalia. When you actually get there, you can kind of spend some time in the place and get a sense of what the culture was like there, what eventually drove it to ruin, what was going on with all these fucking pirates. And, of course, a strong parallel is drawn between what happens between Avery and all the other pirate captains and what's going on in the plot of these backstabbings and betrayals that go on. And so, there's a direct connection. It feels relevant. It's presented in an intriguing way. As I was exploring the city, I legitimately wanted to know what happened. I actually was like, whoa, what's going on here? What's the story? How did this place fall to ruin? I am interested. Never felt that way about the other games, so that's a huge boost to the storytelling. Now, additionally, with the characters, in the first game, Nathan Drake is just kind of a snarky, quippy guy. He's just an adventurer. He's just an explorer. There's not much depth to him. He's just a guy who psychotically murders lots of people in the effort to find a treasure. In the second game, there is an arc, but it doesn't give you any new information about him as a person. It's just kind of an emotional arc of him going from somebody who's overly reckless to and self-serving to someone who has to pull some heroics and try to save the world. In the third game, we learn about his past, and that it adds something to realize how does someone like this come about? Well, it makes sense that he would have been this orphaned kid who had nothing. He grew up stealing. He lived in an orphanage. He was picked up by Sully and ends up in this life. And it's a sensible backstory for the character that starts to make him come to life a little bit, but it doesn't really go that far with it. The main thrust of telling us Drake's backstory in that game is just so that we can see why he has so much pride tied up in this journey that he's on to find the particular treasure of that game. But yeah, in the end, it doesn't amount to much. In Uncharted 4, however, Drake, we really get a sense of why he is the way he is, because we meet his older brother, who has never been mentioned up to this point because everybody thought he was dead. And we learn about how their mom was actually a like this amazing historian and probably treasure hunter who like you know had helped find all these crazy artifacts that like they had been hearing about this stuff at the dinner table growing up, which is why Drake knows so much about history. You know, him and his brother have been doing this kind of shit since they were young. They took off and, you know, went to live this life. We're in and out of prison for a long time, so like we get a sense of why Drake is so violent and like why he's willing to kill people, because he's legit just like had a criminal upbringing, you know. He's like it has never been a normal guy. He's always been a globetrotting you know, criminal. The only thing that's harder to believe about him at this point might just be you know, his snarky personality. Like, how did he become a good guy might be the more important question. But at the same time, he hangs out with Sully. You know, you have a sense that when he was a kid, I mean, he did go to a Catholic school, so like there's a little bit of morals that are infused into him because he, you know, heard all those lectures so many times. So like, I just think that they managed to find a combination of elements that made me believe this character finally, that made me connect with him on some level. And then from there, we have a well-crafted story that presents us with a huge emotional hurdle for him to climb in this game. But I think the most important thing about it is just painting this complete portrait of him. Like, why would he make the decisions he does in this game? I think we understand. They're justified. So Drake's brother had he thought he had died in this prison escape that they did, where them and this guy Rafe were trying to get this cross that would tell them the location of Avery's treasure. But the brother supposedly died in the prison. Turns out he wasn't dead. He's just been in prison for 15 years. He's finally been let out, and supposedly he was let out by this fucking drug lord, crazy criminal guy who wants him to find the treasure within 3 months, or else he'll kill him, basically. And it's a really well done explanation scene because you play as the brother in this prison escape. It's a badass scene. The drug lord guy seems like this really threatening, really awesome villain. So like you've got that, oh man, this guy's cool. Like I can't wait to see where this is gonna go. Later on, it will be revealed. Spoilers, by the way. This was all a complete lie. He was actually just released by Rafe and told to help them. He was just supposed to be helping Rafe find the treasure, but he basically abandoned Rafe to go find it on his own with Drake so that they could have it and fuck Rafe. And he made up all this story to get Drake involved, and Drake makes the critical mistake of leaving his wife Elena out of it. Now, this game does a great job of establishing Drake and Elena's marriage, where you have the scene where you walk around the house just like at the start of The Last of Us, where you examine everything in their home. You kind of get a sense of how they've settled down into what is essentially like a very watered down version of their lifestyle. Like Drake is a diver who works for a salvage company, just like picking shit out of a river. Elena is now doing like travel guides. And it's really funny because I would think of these as exciting jobs. Like these are jobs that I feel like most people would consider to be relatively interesting jobs. But from the perspective of, you know, a high level journalist who like covers wars and shit, like civil wars in Syria, and a guy who's, you know, fucking seen apocalyptic mummy shit. That's I don't know why that's the phrase that came to mind to describe what he finds. This is a really boring life, you know. But the way that the game handles the idea that these two have settled down into a boring life, I like. Because it would have been very easy to just be like, oh, Drake's bored of having to do paperwork, and like there's an element of that, but you really understand why he thinks that he should do this life, because he's kind of, it's not just for his wife or just to settle down. It's like he's really scared of becoming that reckless person again. He's afraid of, you know, getting into trouble. Like even more so, like even his wife is telling him to do, there's this job that the guy who's the manager of his salvage company wants to do, where some crash had happened off the coast of Malaysia, and there's like you know, a retirement money buried there, as he puts it. And, if they could just go do this job, they'd have all this money, and it's a real easy job. It doesn't seem dangerous. Nobody else is after this treasure. And so Elena's like, why not just go ahead and do it? And Drake's like, because I don't really want to go down this slippery slope. It's like, I don't want to, like, he's trying to go cold turkey, basically. He's trying to be like, no, I'm just a normal guy now. There's nothing, no crazy shit, nothing illegal. No, I don't want to do any of this shit. So, like, he's pushing himself too hard. And of course, he would like to go on adventures again. Of course, he's going to have fun if he goes out on these adventures again. But this isn't really about the struggle for Nate to fight his urge for adventure. It's about his fear of becoming the dangerous person that he used to be. It's never presented to us like Nate's slipping. It's like the whole time he'd rather not be doing this. He's in denial of it. He's jaded to it. He's trying to deny the fun that he's having. And his brother, meanwhile, has been in prison for 15 years and just wants to go on adventures. Like, he's basically living the life he felt he was promised all those years ago. He's, finally chasing the treasures, and, like, his brother has been doing all this amazing shit the whole time that he's been in prison. So he wants to, to catch up. And it's almost understandable why he would come up with the story to get Drake, to get Nate to do this thing with him, because it's like, after all that time, how could he not take this opportunity to, like, finally do the thing that he felt like they were destined for, that he's been stewing on for 15 years. He's obviously not going to let Drake just stay at home. But, like, both of these are, it's just a bunch of fatal miscommunications, where, like, his brother Sam really should have, he shouldn't have presented it this, like, he was so desperate to get there before Rafe did that, like, he could have just worked with Rafe to get there. He could have involved Nate in a safer way, too much of his pride is mixed up in it, and that's why he comes up with this story and he leads everybody down this wrong path. And in Drake's case, like, he shouldn't have lied to Elena, because if he had told her the same story that his brother had told him, she would have gotten involved. She would have wanted to help, and, like, as Drake puts it when he finally finds the words later in the game, he's like, it wasn't necessarily that I was trying to protect you or anything. It's that I was trying to protect myself from losing you. I was just afraid that if I went on this adventure, then you would, not be okay with it and you would leave me. And it's like, everybody else knows that wouldn't be the case, and he just doesn't want to risk it, basically. But he should have brought her, because she's great at all this stuff, and, like, having her out for him, having his back is more beneficial. She also probably would have figured out about the lie. She probably would have done some research on the drug lord and figured out this whole situation, Again, there is a lot of just, like, little things where it's like all this character had to do was say this and things would have gone very differently, and it's a little unreasonable. Like, I can't believe that Sully didn't figure out that the drug lord was dead or do research on that, considering he did some research on the job. That Rafe never said anything suggestive of the fact that Sam was supposed to have been working for him this whole time. That seemingly Nate didn't even come home to see Elena before taking off on the Malaysia job. Like, why wasn't she just suspicious immediately? Just, there's, little things like that. And the biggest problem I have with the writing in this game is the usual issue of enemies don't just shoot each other. There's all these weird moments where people who've been trying to kill each other by proxy for hours and hours end up in standoffs where one person's got somebody else at gunpoint and just doesn't pull the trigger for long enough that something changes about the situation and they can get away. Or for whatever reason, Nate won't kill, what's her name? Nadine. Even though she's been sending men after him and we've literally gunned down, like, hundreds of her men it's a little bit of, a good spot of the old ludonarrative dissonance, if you will, which is actually a trophy I got in this game. I don't know what for. Maybe I just killed enough people and that was what got it. That would be funny if that is what it is. But, like, yeah, it's really weird that in the cutscenes, like, Drake is always trying to spare people if he can, even though they're all trying to kill each other at all of the times. I don't get that. It seems like it'd be easy enough to write around, but whatever. So, thematically, the thing that interested me the most in this game was, and the only thing that's not really present in the text is this idea of becoming jaded. That Drake is, he keeps trying to downplay how exciting this adventure is. And part of it is out of self-preservation, that he doesn't want to give in to this life again. But it's also just that he's experienced a lot of this shit. And Sam keeps telling him, like, hey man, like, can't you just, like, appreciate what's going on here? Like, can't you just appreciate that this looks cool? Like, how jaded could you possibly be, And it felt like it was definitely speaking to the audience on some level. Like, talking about how we're on our 4th Uncharted game, like, we could just as easily be jaded and overly critical and just like, I've seen it all before. It's just another adventure. Who cares, But it's like, yeah, but enjoy this one, can't you just live in the moment here and, like, appreciate this? And as somebody who, I'm always fighting with that jadedness because, and a lot of people think that I am very jaded because it's so easy for me to not enjoy things. But, like, I go out of my way to seek things that will, be exciting for me. And for Drake, that would mean treasure hunting. But, like, sort of at the end of the game, what they find is a happy medium where Elena's like, hey, look, when we were on that adventure, it made me realize I don't want to fucking sit around at home and write travel guides. Like, we can do something a little more adventurous. It doesn't have to be dangerous. We don't have to be finding lost cities of gold, but, like, we don't have to be a fucking nuclear family. Like, let's go do this Malaysia job, make a shitload of money, and then, live somewhat exciting lives. And that's what they end up doing at the end. And it's such a great parallel scene where towards the beginning, you walk around Nate and Elena's house, and I mean, it's cozy, it's comfy, it's a fine place, a nice 2-story in the suburbs, like, there's nothing wrong with their living situation. But when you see their house at the end of the game, and it's just this fucking badass big open ranch on the ocean, everything is set up just so. Nate's got his own, like, workshop. They own a boating company. They're like, they're actively doing fun things. And it's like, this is the life you would expect Nate to retire to. Like, you can't picture the man you played as in those first 3 games having the life that he has at the start of this game. And it's kind of funny that, like, at the beginning, you're kind of thinking of it as like, oh, they've settled down. They're trying to be mature. But, like, the game actually tells you don't do that. Like, this is a wrong-headed idea of maturity. This is not the final form. You should be doing what you love and being satisfied with your life and, living up to your own standards, basically. And that's kind of what they're doing at the end. And you play as their daughter for a little bit and, just run around and check out how cool their house is. And then she finds out that they've been adventurers, like, she finds a picture of Nate with a fucking shotgun next to Elena sitting on a pile of Spanish treasure. So yeah, like, I appreciated that message. I thought that was neat. I'm really glad that the game's message wasn't like, oh, Nate has to, resist the call to adventure to appease his wife. And I like that Elena's really the one who's kind of pressuring him to get back out there. I will say, though, that Elena is probably the least interesting character in this game simply because she has never had to learn or grow throughout this series. Like, she's always just been kind of perfect. Like, she's always just been totally in charge of the situation, making all the right decisions. There's never been, like, a character flaw for her that would make her more interesting. She spends most of this game just looking fucking unbelievably depressed over the fact that she's been lied to, and like, you feel sorry for her and stuff, and like she's clearly a great partner for Drake. We're sold on that like, she's a badass adventurer, she's a traveler, she's snarky and quippy like he is. I don't really know how they fell in love aside from the fact that they both like doing this kind of thing, which I guess is enough. Because like in the first game, there's not really any budding relationship. Like, they have chemistry insofar as they say snarky things to each other, but like you never get the feeling that they're like falling in love. They just kind of are together at the end. And then like in each of the subsequent games they have split and are, like rekindle the magic by the end, just by way of, I guess, being swept up in the moment. So when you get to 4, it's like, okay, I see that they've settled down together, but like, what is the basis of this relationship really? But like, by the end, you're kind of more sold on the idea that like, okay, well, yeah, it is the adventure. It's the fact that these two like doing this kind of thing that has brought them together and will keep them together. But like, yeah, aside from that, you just don't really get a sense of what's Elena's deal beyond just being a badass and always right about everything. So, she ends up being a little less interesting than characters like Nate or Sam, who have really deep flaws, but are still likable, and that's what makes them interesting. That you see all these problems and you're disappointed in them at moments, but in the end you still want to see them succeed. Although I will say Sam gets a little too off the hook, considering how big of a lie he perpetuated against Nate. How like he basically put his life in absurd amounts of danger and ruined all of his relationships, at least temporarily, for the sake of a lie. And he's not really held accountable for it at the end. He ends up becoming Sully's partner, which is fun. A fun idea. Just, maybe there could have been a little bit more. Like, I get that everybody's just happy to have him alive, but very forgiving. I've seen a lot less forgiveness over a lot more petty of disputes in most of the brother relationships of people this age that I've witnessed in my life. So, just saying, they forgive each other pretty fucking easily. I've just been talking about the story this whole time, pretty much. So, I will also say of the story that the pacing is really good, like it was in the first 2 games, which I always said was the biggest strength of them. You open on a boat segment where there's a storm going on and you're piloting a boat and you're fucking knocking other boats out of the water. You crash land at the foot of an island. Your brother's there. So like, not as memorable as the second game's opening, but still a solid way to start the game. But the more memorable part is when you go into your memories. So you do have an unfortunate section where you play as Kid Drake, just as a tutorial, escaping from the nunnery. I mean, it's nice to get more insight into his backstory. I think it's more well done than it was in the previous game, for sure. But it's mostly just a tutorial section. Let me tell you, you gotta make sure you have the instructions on the controls turned on, because in each of these games, I had initially just turned off tutorials, but in this game, the controls are somewhat different, and there were a couple of moments. There's particularly one moment where you're hiding from this nun while she's smoking a cigarette, and you have to sneak around this corner, and the game will not let you do anything other than this particular maneuver, which would have been on screen had I not turned off the tutorial mode. So I didn't know what the fuck I was supposed to do. I was just like, why do I keep getting stuck here? Like, I kept restarting the checkpoint thinking the game was glitched, not realizing that in this game you have to like particularly hold forward around the corner before you press circle to like switch which wall you're attached to, which I did not use that much in combat because it's kind of a pain in the ass to figure out the. One of the problems I've had with all the Uncharted games is that, and that I keep forgetting to mention until now, thank God, is that what direction Nate moves depends on where your camera's facing. So he doesn't move forward when you press forward. He moves in whatever way is forward for the camera, which can get pretty confusing at certain camera angles, especially when you're in the middle of a firefight trying to switch cover. So, like, there are just moments where it's like difficult to figure out exactly which direction you need to be pressing a button in, or which face button you need to press. I did lose a certain number of lives in all of these games just to like fucking up the cover system, just like pressing the wrong button at the wrong moment or holding the wrong direction, him snapping to a different piece of cover than I expected. Always been a problem, but not like a game ending one or anything. So you have that segment, then you get to the prison part, and that's probably the more memorable, very movie-esque bit of this game. And I'll even say I really appreciate how this game, again, starts off more like a movie, more like this one continuous, action set piece, cutscene romp, and then eventually opens up into more of a free form, exploration video game. But like the movie segments are well done. They're well shot, well acted, well choreographed. The characters are interesting. You want to know what's going on. Like, you're in prison. Why? And then you find out, oh, you're here to do you're here to steal something, and not the warden, but like one of the guards is actually a plant who's on your side, but he wants in, and your other guy stabs him to death, and you're like, oh my god, shit's going crazy. And then your fucking brother gets shot, and you're like, oh shit, how did he get out of that? And then you're at Drake's house, and now you're walking around the house, and you play Crash Bandicoot. I fucking hate Crash Bandicoot, but that's for another time. You're hanging out with Elena, and it's very obvious that the main reason they put Crash Bandicoot in there was to suck their own dick about how fucking amazing the graphics are, which they are. This game's only a couple years old, so unlike the others where I had that jadedness of having seen more modern of graphics, with this one it still looks incredibly modern. It's a little uncanny valley, like it's kind of too realistic. It's kind of creepy in a way. Like in moments where the characters just look so real that they look like actors, but then there's something subtly wrong, and you're like, oh geez, this feels like the androids have this is good enough to be a sex bot, basically, is what I'm saying, but not good enough to convince you it's human. So it's in that slightly weird spot. But yeah, there's this moment where, it's showing the game, and then it cuts to Drake and Elena on the couch in this like gorgeously lit shot, and it's like, ooh, look at fucking how far we've come. But yeah, visual design and lighting is spectacular in this game. And, I complained in the third one how, in spite of how good the graphics are, the art design just wasn't interesting. It just felt like realistic depictions of cities that, were not inherently cool to look at. It was just hyper detailed for no purpose. In this game, you've got like the amazing lighting effects, scenes set at interesting times of day with interesting shadows being cast. There's the prison break sequence where you're playing as Sam that looks fucking super intense because you got all these like harsh lights against really dark shadows, and the situation is totally chaotic. It looks awesome. So, and you get a lot of that, especially in the early part of the game. The later part is more about the verdant forests and locations that you're exploring through. But gameplay-wise, how the gameplay plays into the visual design is really interesting, because the levels are all across the board are more open in this game. When you play Uncharted 1, if you're doing a climbing segment, it is a straight line. You see exactly where you need to go. You just gotta do the thing. In this game, there's a little bit more of branching paths. You might go a little ways and end up at a dead end, but from that dead end, you have a better view of the correct path, and you have like some kind of sweeping vista. So like they always organize the platforming in such a way that, you don't realize you're coming up on an amazing vantage point of where you've been and where you're going, So just having that little bit of openness makes it feel so much more organic. It doesn't feel like you're just playing through a linear level, even though you are. It feels like you're just straight up exploring the place, and that just makes it feel way more engrossing, way more what's the word I'm looking for? Immersive. That's the one. You feel like you're really fucking there. Particularly when you're on the island that takes up the second half of the game, because you explore so fucking much of it. And you even boat around it at first. So this game added open level segments. And first of all, let's drop calling them open world segments, because that makes no fucking sense. The whole idea of an open world game is that it's literally an open world where you can go anywhere at any time. This is not like that. It's just parts where the level is big and where you don't have to go on an exact linear path. But they're not like long sections, and there's not extra shit to do. You're still just going to the destination. Like, I mean, there might be some hidden treasures with some really light challenges. They actually made treasures have some purpose in this game, because there's unlockables tied to it, like unlockable costumes and stuff in the front menu. It's not the same as Tomb Raider though, and I'm sure that's what they were kind of copying, because it feels kind of like the secret tombs. But in Tomb Raider, there was gameplay implication for collecting things, because you got experience points and you could use that to level up your gear. So like, there was a legitimate reason to try to 100% Tomb Raider while you're playing through it, like to go back through areas and try to get stronger. In this game, it's just kind of a bonus offshoot thing, and I was like, I don't feel incentivized enough to go out of my way to break the pacing of the story and find all this extra crap, but I'm sure some people would. But anyway, you know, you got these big open sections where you drive around in a car or in a boat, and they just look amazing and feel great. And you cover a huge amount of distance, and you get kind of a sense of the place you're heading to from the outside. So, like, by the time you're done with the driving segment, you already feel like this strong sense of place, like you're there. And it also does what the second game did a lot of like starting you off far away, seemingly really far away from your destination. Like, you see it in the skybox, it looks like you're miles away, and then you just travel there either by car or on foot. Like, you're climbing all these ledges, you're really making your way over there. You keep looking up and seeing yourself getting closer, you know, and the characters say like, oh look, it's right over there. And like, it makes you feel like you've covered this enormous distance, because really the trick of it is that you have moments where you cover a huge amount, where like, say, a cliffside crumbles and then you swing with a rope and you just covered like, 20 meters. And then at other times you're just climbing up one little wall for, the same amount of time. And so like, it causes you to lose your sense of place. You don't realize how far you've traveled until you've gotten there, and then you're always surprised by like, wow, I really feel like I traveled all this way, even though you didn't do that much gameplay wise. You didn't spend most of that time actually traversing it, because most of it was stuff crumbling or just getting you closer by chance. Whatever the case, it makes you feel more in the setting. And even in 2, when I think the section that did this the best in 2 was the Nepal section, when you're in the city and you're making your way to the cathedral and you climb a building and you do all this crazy shit. But even then, in that game, again, it was so linear. It was always like you're in a locked off street and there's only one thing to do. In this game, if you were in a street, there would be, different vantage points you could climb to and overlook the whole place that you're in, and like just do something other than exactly what the sequence allows for. It's not a huge amount of openness. It doesn't make a gigantic difference, but you feel it. You emotionally feel more connected to the things that are going on and the setting that you're in, because it feels more real and alive. It feels like you had options, So yeah, there's lots of sections where you'll be like, maybe you'll drive up to a place that there's a shootout, and then you participate in the shootout, and then you get back in the car and drive to the next area, and the shootouts are just straight up the best they've ever been. Most of them are in big open areas where there's lots of stuff to climb on, grass to hide in, fuckloads of enemies who are all moving around organically. The AI is way the fuck better than it's ever been, because in all the other games, enemies just followed a scripted path. It was like, this guy stays up here, this guy stays over here. You have to figure out what's the best order to kill these guys in. The only thing they ever did was just advance on you. They never like moved around tactically or anything. In this game, if enemies spot you, they will, they'll continually move around. If you try to hide behind one piece of cover for too long, they're going to start flanking you. They're not just going to throw grenades, but they're going to like, move around your sides. They're going to try to run away from you. Like, there's just a lot more going on in the firefights and to keep track of. So they're a lot harder, but a lot more fun because it doesn't feel like you're just trying to do the same thing until you get it exactly right. It feels like you're trying something different each time. You're going, okay, well, that didn't work. What if I went around from the left? Okay, well, what if I climbed that tower first? All right, well, if I kill that group of guys over there with the rocket launcher, will I still be able to get the sniper? Like, who should I kill with which gun at what vantage point? And you could potentially stealth through all of these scenarios. I don't have the fucking patience for that because there's usually a hell of a lot of enemies, and stealthing is really hard because all the enemies are moving around constantly and looking everywhere, and usually the fights start off in such a way that you see a lot of guys who you could easily stealth kill, but by the time you get to them, you'll realize that they're actually in line of sight of somebody else. So it's really tricky. If you want to stealth through, you'll have to really study the area, probably over multiple deaths, figure out where everyone is in relationship to everyone else, and take your time and do it real slow. I definitely would never have patience for that because it's a lot easier to just gun your way through. Again, I played on hard mode. I died a lot, but I had a lot of fun. And, I would say that if I had one complaint, it's that not all of the guns feel that useful. And since there's enough availability of all of them, there's not a lot of situations that certain guns are the best in. You will usually try to, get just the guns you like the most as opposed to whatever is best for the situation. But, nonetheless, there's a lot of rope swinging that you can do around battlefields because they've introduced a rope swinging mechanic in this game. You can, there's battles that utilize water where you can go underwater to evade enemies. There's one particular gunfight later in the game where they incorporate that, and just because they know you'll spend a lot of time underwater, they really went all out on making the underwater area look incredible. So yeah, like it's exciting when you're doing a cool gunfight and seeing some really cool looking shit at the same time. The locations of gunfights are just generally better. So yeah, I would say that not only is the platforming more open, more varied, you have the rope swinging, you also have like a pike you get later that you can stab into walls. Like, it just takes a little bit more thought and effort. It's not like just hold forward and press A like it usually was in the other games. You actually have to try to figure out the path a little bit. You actually have to press buttons with timing, and swing from ropes and shit. It's nothing super advanced. It's not really a massive test of skill of your platforming ability. Just feels better. It feels less gamey and more immersive, even though it's still a fun game. And the level design's better, the visuals are better, the gunplay is way the fuck better. So yeah, just generally all around, I would say the gameplay is great. Now the scripted sequences, surprisingly, there's not as much crazy scripted sequences as there were in the second game. But there is one huge midpoint thing that is fucking awesome. And it's where you have to drive this truck or Jeep. I don't remember what you're driving, but you drive this, I think Jeep, down through the streets of this city, and you're running from this big like tank. Not a tank, but like, one of those big fucking military vehicles with a turret on it. And you just kind of lay waste to this whole fucking city in Madagascar trying to escape from this thing. And it looks awesome. You're covering a huge amount of ground, so the level feels gigantic. Shit's blowing up and going crazy. I think it was probably inspired by a scene from Bad Boys 2. Now, I haven't actually seen that movie, but I've seen like clips of the part where they just like fucking destroy this whole town. And it looks awesome. And then you transition straight from that onto a part where you're fucking on a rope hanging on the back of a car that's going over a bridge, and you're dodging debris in the lake, and then you're being dragged behind the car and shooting enemies off the things. And then it basically becomes another one of those sections where you are hopping from vehicle to vehicle. But thankfully, it's more like the second game than the third game, where there's actually some tactics involved. You actually have to, like, concentrate on which enemies to fire at. But even better is that you're not just switching from vehicle to vehicle, but you're taking over some of the vehicles as this goes on. So once again, like the great segment, the train segment in 2, you've got the environment that continually looks like you're in new places. So it just feels like you're in this unbelievably fucking huge chase scene where you're commandeering vehicles, swinging on ropes between vehicles, knocking guys off. Like, it's the final form of this thing that they've been doing since the beginning. You've had this segment more or less in each game in some form. This is the best possible version of it. So that was really exciting. And that is kind of the big set piece moment. Like, you've got lots of the little, usual things that happen in all these games. There is another running from a tank scene, kind of, but it's not nearly as crazy as the one from the second game. So I would say that as far as crazy scripted sequences go, Uncharted 2 might still be the high watermark for the series. I mean, nothing in this, as exciting as that one scene was, because there have already been so many sections in these games of being on top of trucks, and there's only been one part where you do a crazy train thing, I think the train is still the most impressive set piece in these games. But Uncharted 4, again, it's just more fixated on great level design. It's more fixated on exploring, getting to know the location. And when you finally go to Avery's Island, and you're driving this boat around all these islands trying to figure out which one is the correct one to go to. You arrive at the place, you explore the base of it, you climb all the way up this huge fucking island. You eventually make it to this destroyed colony. Then you have to go from one side of the island to the other to get to the rich part. Then you're exploring these, disheveled mansions that are half sunken, and then finally making it to Avery's place and piecing together this whole story of what's going on there. It's just easily the most exciting that any of these games has been. I would say I enjoyed it a lot more than even The Last of Us, which I think is a pretty good game. And shout out, by the way, to E. Hill, a patron of mine who is a level designer for Naughty Dog, working on The Last of Us 2, who's listening to these, who said he couldn't wait for me to talk about The Last of Us. I'm not planning to cover The Last of Us in this series. This is just about Uncharted. Really, the only reason I did all of this is that I wanted to play Uncharted 4. I'd heard good things about it. It looked cool. I wanted to play it, but I wanted to play all the other 3 first. And when I got my PS4, I got it with the Nathan Drake collection, and I got Uncharted 4 not long afterwards. It took me 4 years to finally get around to fucking playing all this shit. So, yeah, I basically just played all these games so I could play Uncharted 4, and I just did podcasts about them because I had thoughts about them. But I did do a podcast on The Last of Us back when it came out on the Digibro After Dark channel. If you just search Digibro The Last of Us, I'm sure you can find it. So if you wanted to hear my thoughts as of having just played the game, I think I did it with my brother, who had also played through it. So, I already got my thoughts on that game out there, but whereas I think that game improved a lot of things over Uncharted in terms of having better gunplay, better dramatic storytelling, cinematography, things like that, characterization. I really think that Uncharted 4 took a lot of the best elements of that and just put it in a package that resonates with me better. I think the level design's a lot better. I think the pacing is a hell of a lot better, because I don't think the pacing of The Last of Us is all that solid. And that the characters are just better. I think they're more interesting and more nuanced, partly because we've had so much time to build them. But really, most of Drake's development happens in this game. Most of him becoming an interesting character really happens here, and just crafting such a specific character, someone who really is a larger-than-life figure. He's not just a generic treasure hunter anymore. He's a character with a whole mythos, a backstory, a life that we can observe in full. He's become an actual comic book character now, a fully-fledged one who's existed for a long time. So, turning him into a worthy gaming protagonist, I think, might be the best thing this damn game could be remembered for. So, I'm trying to think if there's any more specifics I really want to dive into. I mean, the game still has. I would still say there are some minor issues I have with the game. Just like occasional frustrations in combat. It's obviously not the most fun game in the world because, like, while the gameplay is good and I think that it's a fun experience overall, it's neither the most interesting story nor the most interesting gameplay in a game. Nor even the most interesting combination of the two that's out there. So it's not like I'm going to say this is like one of the greatest games of all time, but I would definitely give it like a strong 8 to a light 9. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I think I would play it again, in the future. This is honestly, this is the only Uncharted I would return to now that it exists. Like, having played through the original 3, I'm glad I did, because I know I won't go back to them when this one is so much more satisfying and just fulfilling to play. It really felt like the final form of the Uncharted experience. I will say that, again, because it doesn't have as many big set pieces as 2, I don't think as much of the game will stand out in my memory. It does improve on things like having better puzzles than 3 had, because again, the puzzles are tied to the narrative of the game, which is about all these pirates. So you've got all this cool pirate imagery, like this repeated use of the sigils. Like, there's just more meaning to the puzzles than there was in the last one. It doesn't feel like just random abstract symbols with no purpose. It's like you actually, there's like a tactile connection to the story, and the game doesn't have as many of them. There's only a few puzzles, mostly in the first half of the game. The second half of the game is really just like this nonstop ascent of this island, and continuing this push and pull of the plot with Sam and Nate, trying to simultaneously having fun and getting to know each other again after 15 years, but then having this epic betrayal. Elena comes back, Sully comes back, you got the whole gang at the end. It's a picturesque finale. Oh yeah, I do gotta complain about the final boss. So I haven't really talked about Rafe that much. I think Rafe is a great character. He's he's not terribly complex, but he makes sense. I like that he is intelligent, he's brutal, he's an asshole, but he's not like unreasonable or stupid. You get the sense that he is legitimately threatening, and he definitely seems like he's supposed to look like a young Tim Roth. I think that's what they based him on, and I think that because he looks like Tim Roth, they tried to make the final battle a reference to the movie Rob Roy, because you have a sword fight at the end that's Rob Roy-esque, although it takes place in a burning ship with a bunch of gold in it, which might be in reference to the end of Ninja Scroll. So I think they were going for Rob Roy meets Ninja Scroll at the end. That's my theory. E-Hill, if you've heard anything about this, if you can ask somebody at the office and confirm in the comments, let me know. Were they trying to make Rob Roy meets Ninja Scroll? Whatever the case is, the final battle, as tends to be the case in Uncharted games, has nothing to do with the control scheme of the game you've been playing up to this point, which infuriates me. So the end of the first game had a fucking QuickTime event that I remember the first time I played the game on the higher difficulties, I really struggled with. I could not nail the timing on this fucking thing. I hate QuickTime events. And thankfully, there almost aren't any in this game. The only times that there's something resembling them, it uses the regular controls of the game. So for instance, you might slide down a long embankment and then at the end have to jump and quickly rope a ledge. And it's like, yeah, well, I already know to rope with L1, so like that comes naturally. It's not like a button suddenly shows up that I have to press to make this thing happen, which happens a lot in all 3 of the other games. Well, there's not like crazy amount of QuickTime events, but there's always been enough to annoy me. In the second game, the final boss was actually good, Lazarevich. He just chases you around and you shoot at him. It's pretty much the normal controls. It's pretty tough, but it's doable, It could be frustrating because it took a long time, but it was at least, it functioned like the game that you had been playing up to that point. The third game has a stupid fist fight that sucks. This game has a stupid sword fight that sucks. And the reason it sucks is that when Rafe attacks you, if he's attacking from the left, you press triangle, and if he's attacking from the right, you press square, and these are the only buttons you can use in this fight, except you have to mash, or not square, you press circle when he comes from the right, and you mash square when you're attacking him. First of all, it's not clear whether you can damage him by pressing square at first, because you really have to only attack him after you've blocked a certain number of his attacks, and then a square button pops up next to him, and that's the only time you're actually doing damage. So even though, like, sometimes when you do attack him, like, it initiates a kind of sequence as though you were going to hurt him, it's annoying. Eventually I figured out just don't press square at all. But you press triangle and circle, but the problem is that circle normally is the roll, like the dodge roll / get behind cover. So instinctively, when I start taking a lot of damage, I want to roll away. And so I keep trying to press circle to roll, but circle is block strike from the right. Now, while he does telegraph his attacks, they also are often deliberate misdirects. And you can't always tell which direction he's supposed to be coming from, because sometimes it looks like he's coming from the right, but it counts as a left strike because of, I don't know, just the way his hand is. Like, you basically just have to memorize what each gesture means in order to do this fight. And I just got fucking fed up with it. I died a whole bunch, and I was really pissed off, and I just kicked the game down to easy mode, and that made it, like, basically in slow motion. So that made it pretty easy to beat. But yeah, I literally got so frustrated that I kicked the difficulty down on the final boss, just because I was like, why am I suddenly dealing with this control scheme? And, like, I wanted to like this sequence because the idea of it is cool. I like the endings of Rob Roy and fucking Ninja Scroll, so I like the idea here. But it was, it just wasn't that well executed. Also, this fight has one of the groaner sort of bits of dialogue where he's ranting about how he's not going to lose the treasure to some 2-bit thieves, a senile con artist, and a washed-up journalist. If you want to hang out with all those losers, you can go ahead, but I'm going to be a cool guy. And it's just like, all right, like, I get that he's kind of unraveling here in frustration, but this is a kind of a cheesy way to go about that. Like, I think he should have been more pissed, more vicious, because he's a fucking psycho. Like, we saw him stab a guy towards the beginning of the game. Like, I like that he's usually trying to be, like, kind of aloof, and, like, he wants to come off as, like, a cool badass, but really he, loses his temper and goes into this hot-headed, insane rage. But, like, there needed to just be more insane rage. The other big groaner in the game is when you have to leave Elena towards the end to go after Sam, and she's like, it's not fair. The dishes, we take turns. You better make it back so you can do the dishes. Stop it. Stop. Why? All the other dialogue in this game was so much more realistic. Why would you throw in the super fucking corny shit at the end that no one would ever say? Yeah, like, just it's like they felt, it's like I said about the third game when I said they asked themselves what they could do, not whether they should. That's how I feel about that line. Really cheesy, groaner, but overall, I thought the dialogue was great, and the writing was good, and the story was good, and the game was good. So yeah, I'd give it a strong 8 to a light 9. I enjoyed myself. I think it's the best one. I am curious to play the spin-off game. I don't own it, and I'm kind of Uncharted out for now. I have been playing this all week. My mind feels like Uncharted. When I walk around, I feel like I'm doing Drake's walk cycle, just because it's so realistic that it just feels like real life. So it's fucking with my brain. I keep hearing the stupid music in my head. So yeah, I think I'll probably hold off for a little bit before I play the other Uncharted. But I'm glad I took this journey. I feel like it was all justified by getting to play Uncharted 4 and to see the evolution of these games. And it definitely was. It was a big salve after playing the third one, which I really hated. So yeah. Thanks for everybody who listened to all these Uncharted videos. I hope you enjoyed. and I'll see you later. Check out Tom's videos that he posts on this channel, because I might not post here for a little while.